The sea holds secrets more ancient than any ruin, and darker than any night sky. Beneath the waves lie the remnants of stories that were never meant to be found, shipwrecks untouched for decades, even centuries. Some are graves, some are time capsules, and some whisper. This is a journey through those wrecks, not just what sank them, but what came after. Stories of vanishings, of voices without bodies, of ships that move without wind or crew. These are tales not only of disaster, but of what still lingers in the silence afterward. If this brings you peace, let it be your safe harbor. Subscribe and drift back whenever you want. Our voyage begins in the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest and most treacherous shipping lanes in the world. Between Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, countless vessels have vanished here over the centuries. But one ship in particular casts a shadow longer than the rest. The SS Orang Medan, a name few know how to pronounce, and fewer dare to investigate. Translated loosely from Malay, it means man from Medan, a city in Indonesia. But the ship's identity remains as murky as the waters it supposedly sank beneath. In June 1947, or was it February 1948? The records disagree. Ships nearby picked up a distress signal, a Morse code broadcast, broken and panicked. All officers, including captain, dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. The transmission continued with bursts of static, then one final message, "I die." After that, silence. The message had no coordinates, just a rough estimate, somewhere near the Dutch East Indies. The closest vessel at the time was an American ship, the Silver Star. It adjusted course immediately and raced toward the signal's source. When they found the Orang Medan drifting quietly on a hot, still ocean, it looked like a ghost. There was no smoke, no fire, no sound, just the glint of a metal hull rocking slightly in the current. The Silver Star sent a boarding party. What they found chilled even the most seasoned sailors. Everyone on board was dead. Bodies lay strewn across the deck, the bridge, the radio room, each one frozen in grotesque terror, mouths open wide, eyes bulging, arms outstretched, as if shielding themselves from some invisible force. Some were found curled up, backs arched, teeth clenched so tightly that they'd shattered, and yet there were no wounds, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Even the ship's dog was found, rigid and snarling. Below deck, the engine room was still intact, no signs of fire or flooding, no poison in the food stores, no signs of gas leakage, just the same bodies, everywhere locked in a silent scream. The rescuers decided to tow the ship back for investigation, but as they attached the tow lines, smoke began to rise from the lower decks. Seconds later, an explosion ripped through the vessel. Flames erupted skyward. The Silver Star crew scrambled for safety. Moments later, the Orang Medan sank beneath the waves, vanishing forever, without giving up a single answer. Since then, the story has been retold 100 different ways. Some say it was a chemical leak from illegal cargo, potassium cyanide or nerve gas smuggled post-WWE. Others whisper that it was an encounter with something not of this world, a paranormal phenomenon, a ghost ship in the truest sense. Skeptics argue the ship may have never existed at all. There's no official registration for a ship named Orang Medan, no port logs, no construction records, and yet, the Silver Star's logs do exist. They mention a rescue attempt, a distress call, and men who never spoke of what they saw again. Some believe the explosion was intentional, an effort to erase something unspeakable. Others believe the crew died from carbon monoxide poisoning, with the terrifying expressions just a morbid trick of post-mortem rigor. But there's something too precise about the way every body was found, too consistent. Almost like they had all seen the same thing at the same time. Modern wreck hunters have tried to locate the Orang Medan's final resting place, but the ocean in that region is unpredictable. Currents change without warning, visibility is low, and sonar is notoriously unreliable. Every attempt ends in failure, as if the ship doesn't want to be found, or was never there to begin with. Still, every few years a report resurfaces, a ghostly silhouette spotted drifting silently across the horizon. A ship with no crew, no flag, no movement, only stillness and the faint echo of a distress signal on an abandoned frequency. All officers, including captain, dead. Back on land, the story is treated as a maritime legend, but sailors know better. Ask around any port in Indonesia, and you'll find someone, usually older, usually quiet, who remembers, who heard the story not from a book, but from a man who knew a man who saw the orang medan, and they'll tell you the same thing, that it's real, that it was cursed, that it's still out there, waiting. In the decades since, the story has seeped into pop culture. It inspired documentaries, novels, even video games, but none of them capture the suffocating silence described by the Silver Star's crew, that sense of wrongness, of stepping onto a ship where death itself seemed suspended in the air, that every echo, every creak of metal, felt like it was watching you back. Of all the theories, one remains the most disturbing, that the orang medan was part of something classified, that the bodies weren't just victims of a gas leak or accident, that they were exposed to something not tested, not understood, a biological agent, a failed experiment, a weapon never meant for use, and when it failed, someone made sure it would never be traced. But if so, why the distress call? Why the specific language? I die. Who was the last man to press that button? And what did he see before his finger fell away? The sea never tells, it only keeps, and when it finally gives something back, it's usually too late. The SS Orang Medan remains one of the ocean's most compelling haunted wrecks, a vessel with no origin, a crew with no killer, and a wreck that can't be found. Whether you believe the story or not, one thing is certain, the ocean remembers everything, even when we forget. Especially when we forget. Part 2. The curse of the SS Valencia. The Pacific Northwest coastline is jagged and cold, with cliffs that rise like stone teeth from the sea. Dense fog drapes the waters in silence, and the waves break against the rocks with a rhythm as old as the earth itself. Sailors call this stretch of ocean the graveyard of the Pacific, and for good reason. Over 2,000 ships have met their end along its shores, but few have left behind a legend as chilling as the wreck of the SS Valencia. In January 1906, the SS Valencia set sail from San Francisco, headed north for Victoria, British Columbia. It was a passenger steamship, built not for beauty or speed, but for endurance. Her iron hull was strong, her engines steady, but even the sturdiest vessel is no match for nature when she decides to strike. The Valencia departed under cloudy skies and moderate winds, but as she reached the open sea, a storm began to rise. Wind screamed across the deck, rain fell in sheets, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. The crew, struggling to navigate, believed they were farther offshore than they actually were. In reality, the Valencia had drifted dangerously close to the Vancouver Island coastline, a wall of rock hidden behind fog and darkness. Around midnight on January 22nd, the ship struck a reef. The impact tore open the hull, and seawater began rushing in. Panic erupted. Lifeboats were lowered, but the waves capsized most of them instantly. The Valencia was trapped, grounded just 50 yards from shore, but the cliffs were sheer, and the water too violent to swim. Survivors clung to the deck, hoping for rescue. They would wait for nearly 2 days. During that time, passengers huddled together in the freezing rain. Some tried to reach the cliffs, climbing hand over hand on makeshift ropes, only to be swept away by the surf. Others remained aboard, watching as the ship slowly disintegrated around them. Several rescue ships attempted to approach, but the seas were too rough. From the shore, witnesses could see the Valencia and its desperate survivors, but they could do nothing. On the morning of January 24th, a massive wave struck the ship and shattered what was left of the Valencia's hull. Dozens were thrown into the sea. Screams were heard, then silence. Only 37 people survived. Over 100 perished, many of them women and children. The official reports describe the horror in grim detail, but the story doesn't end there. In the days and weeks that followed, strange things began to happen. Locals reported seeing ghostly figures along the cliffs where the Valencia went down, women in white dresses, children holding hands, staring out to sea. Fishermen swore they saw the shape of a steamship in the fog, drifting silently before fading into nothing. Some even claimed to hear voices carried on the wind, calling for help in the dead of night. Years later, in 1910, sailors aboard a ship near Pashena Point saw something that chilled them to the bone. A lifeboat, barnacle-covered, weather-worn, floated past them in the water. Inside was the skeletal remains of several men, still sitting upright, as if waiting to be rescued. The number on the boat confirmed it. This was one of the Valencia's missing lifeboats, lost for 4 years, now reappearing hundreds of miles from where it had vanished. But what disturbed investigators most was the condition of the remains. They were too intact, too preserved, as if time itself had stopped for them. That wasn't the last lifeboat sighting either. In 1933, another Valencia lifeboat was discovered in a sea cave on a remote stretch of coast, perfectly preserved, as if untouched by the decades. Inside were oars, ropes, even a tarp, all in good condition. The cave was sealed, almost impossible to reach. No one could explain how it had gotten there. Over time, the wreck of the Valencia became more than a maritime disaster. It became a legend, a symbol of a tragedy too terrible to forget. Locals whispered that the ship was cursed, and that its passengers had never truly left, that their souls wandered the coastline, forever seeking rescue that would never come. To this day, sailors passing through the graveyard of the Pacific speak of odd encounters, disembodied voices, flickering lights in the fog. One even claimed to have seen a woman standing on the water itself, arms outstretched, before vanishing into the spray. And in 2002, a recreational diver searching near the site of the wreck reported hearing what he described as a distant weeping through his dive mask. He surfaced, shaken, and refused to dive in that region again. The SS Valencia lies in pieces beneath the waves, its rusted bones spread across the seabed. But something of it remains. A memory, a presence. Something that clings to the jagged rocks and drifting kelp. Maybe it's the echo of those final hours, the desperation, the helplessness, the loss. Maybe it's something else entirely. Something that doesn't sleep. What makes the Valencia's tale even more haunting is how many people witnessed the aftermath. This was not a wreck lost to time. It unfolded within sight of the shore, within reach of help, and yet nothing could be done. The horror was visible, shared and burned into the memory of a region. Generations passed down the story, and each telling added a layer of sorrow, a layer of mystery, a layer of something unexplainable. And perhaps that's why the legend persists. Because we don't just remember the facts, we remember the feelings. The images of hands reaching from a lifeboat as it capsizes, the sound of children crying in the surf, the helplessness of watching from land, knowing rescue won't arrive in time. The sea, in all its beauty, has always been a place of contrast. It gives, and it takes. It comforts, and it consumes. For the passengers of the SS Valencia, it did both. And the traces of their story, like sea foam, continue to wash ashore even now. Whether the hauntings are real, or born from collective grief, the effect is the same. The wreck still speaks. And for those who listen closely, sometimes the wind sounds a little too much like a voice.
Part 3. The wreck of the SS Beichimo, ghost ship of the Arctic. In the vast, icy waters of the Arctic, where the silence stretches on for miles, and the only sound is the whisper of wind over endless snowdrifts, a strange story has lingered for nearly a century. It's the story of a ship that refused to die, a vessel that was abandoned and yet never sank, sighted over and over again, drifting silently through the frozen expanse like a phantom. This is the haunting tale of the SS Beichimo, the ship that became known as the Ghost of the Arctic. It all began in 1914, when the Beichimo was launched in Sweden. Originally built as a cargo steamer, the ship was 230 feet long, powered by a coal-burning engine, and intended for trade routes in the frigid waters of northern Europe and Canada. In 1921, the Hudson's Bay Company acquired her for voyages into the Canadian Arctic, where she would transport furs, supplies, and passengers between remote trading posts. For over a decade, she served reliably, enduring some of the harshest conditions on Earth. But in 1931, something changed, and the Beichimo would begin a journey not even her most seasoned crew could explain. That year, in October, the Beichimo was making a routine trip to collect a cargo of furs near the town of Barrow, Alaska. But early Arctic winter set in with unusual ferocity, trapping the ship in the forming sea ice. The crew, aware of the risks of being frozen in, offloaded their cargo and some personnel and set up camp nearby on the ice. A few days later, a storm rolled through, a blizzard so intense that it seemed to erase the world itself. And when the skies finally cleared, the Beichimo was gone. At first, the crew believed she had sunk, but incredibly, a few days later, a local Inuit hunter spotted the ship some miles away, drifting and still intact. The crew tracked it down, boarded it again, and considered their options. After a second entrapment in ice, and with conditions worsening, the Hudson's Bay Company ordered the ship to be abandoned. They retrieved the most valuable furs and evacuated the crew by air, assuming the vessel was doomed. Yet the Beichimo refused to vanish. Over the next few decades, the ship was sighted again and again. Inuit hunters, fishing crews, and even Arctic explorers claimed to see her, drifting slowly, sometimes partially encased in ice, always eerily intact. In 1933, she was boarded by a group of Eskimos who took shelter aboard during a storm. In 1939, she was seen near the Beaufort Sea. A few years later, a group of whalers reported spotting her again, floating aimlessly through the frozen fog. Each time, those who approached the Beichimo described the same haunting vision, a deserted, silent ship, creaking as it moved through the ice, empty decks stretching out beneath frost-covered railings. No crew, no lights, just the sound of the wind. The Beichimo became a legend, not only for her survival, but for her ghost-like persistence. She earned the nickname the Arctic Ghost Ship, and tales began to swirl that the vessel was cursed or haunted. Some said the spirits of the original crew remained trapped aboard, unwilling to leave. Others claimed the ship was a bad omen, and that any who boarded her would be lost to the cold. These weren't just local myths. Even the Canadian and US governments took notice. Sightings were officially recorded. Search missions were considered. But every time the Beichimo was found, she would disappear again into the endless white. One of the most compelling aspects of her story is the sheer improbability of her survival. In a region where ice crushes steel and temperatures drop to lethal lows, the Beichimo lasted for decades. Her hull, though weathered, remained intact. Her masts, coated in snow, still stood against the Arctic wind. No one could explain how she remained afloat for so long, nor why she seemed to elude all efforts to recover her. In 1962, more than 30 years after her abandonment, the ship was spotted again, drifting along the Alaskan coast. By then the Beichimo was more ghost than ship, her decks stripped bare by time and scavengers, her wheelhouse silent and frost-bitten. Still she floated. The last confirmed sighting came in 1969, off the Alaskan coast. She was once again drifting through the pack ice, moving as though guided by some unseen hand. After that she vanished. No trace of her has been found since. Some believe she finally succumbed to the pressure of the sea and sank into the depths, her remains hidden beneath layers of ice and silt. Others think she might still be out there, encased in a glacier or trapped beneath shifting flows, waiting for the ice to melt, waiting to be seen once more. To this day, the Beichimo remains one of the most enduring maritime mysteries. She wasn't a glamorous passenger liner, nor a warship. She was a cargo vessel, ordinary, practical, and yet she became something more, a symbol of the unknown, of persistence beyond reason, of the strange forces that seem to operate in the remote corners of our world. The silence of the Arctic makes her story even more haunting. There are no cries for help, no distress calls, just a ship alone in the ice, floating across decades. Her story reminds us that not all hauntings involve ghosts. Sometimes, a presence lingers not because of spirits, but because of questions, because the human mind can't accept the unexplained, because we need answers, and when we don't get them, the mystery takes root. The Beichimo is more than just a lost ship. She is a question echoing across the ice, unanswered and eternal. And somewhere in the deepest part of the Arctic night, when the wind howls across the frozen sea, some say you can still hear the faint creak of her wooden frame, the groan of her metal hull shifting against the ice, as though she's still out there, drifting between the worlds of the living and the lost. A ghost without a grave, a ship that refused to die, a mystery carried on the cold breath of the Arctic. Part 4. The Mary Celeste. The ghost ship that wasn't sinking in the world of maritime mystery. Few stories hold such an enduring grip on the imagination as that of the Mary Celeste. Her name is now almost synonymous with ghost ships, and for good reason. What was found aboard her in 1872 has defied explanation for more than a century. She was not wrecked, she was not sunk, and yet she was empty, silent, adrift. Everything seemed normal, except that every soul on board was gone, never to be seen again. The story of the Mary Celeste is not just a case of disappearance, it's a haunting lesson in how the ordinary can unravel into the unthinkable without warning. The Mary Celeste was a sturdy two-masted brigantine built in Nova Scotia in 1861. She was not new, but she was seaworthy, and had weathered her share of storms. In 1872, she departed New York under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, a respected and devout man with years of experience at sea. Alongside him were his wife Sarah, their two. No response. They boarded the vessel, expecting the worst. What they found defied belief. The Mary Celeste was completely abandoned. The lifeboat was missing, but the ship itself was in good condition, certainly not in distress. There were no signs of violence, no struggle. The ship's hull was intact. The cargo of alcohol barrels was mostly untouched. The logbook, up to 10 days old, contained no indication of problems. The crew's belongings were still in their quarters. The captain's sword was sheathed and untouched. There were even meals laid out, half prepared, as if someone had stepped away from the stove for just a moment. And yet, not a single person remained. 10 people had vanished from a seaworthy ship in the middle of a calm ocean, leaving everything behind but themselves. The questions came quickly and have never really stopped. Why would a seasoned captain abandon a ship that wasn't sinking? If there had been foul play, where was the evidence? If they had fled in the lifeboat, why was the boat never found? There were no distress calls, no floating debris, no bodies, no wreckage, nothing to tell what had happened in that ghostly span of 10 days between the last entry in the log and the discovery by the D.I. Gracia. Investigators at the time could only speculate, and the theories were as varied as they were unsettling. Some suggested an explosion. The ship was carrying barrels of raw alcohol, volatile and potentially dangerous. Perhaps fumes built up in the hold, and a small ignition created a brief, terrifying blast. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to convince the crew they needed to abandon it quickly. But this doesn't explain why they never returned, nor why no damage from such an event was found. Others speculated about rogue waves or seaquakes. A sudden freak event could have frightened the crew into evacuation. But again, the ship was intact. No sign of water damage, no evidence of structural harm. There were whispers of mutiny or piracy, but no valuables were missing, and the cargo worth thousands remained untouched. Some even claimed the crew of the D.I. Gracia may have had a hand in the disappearance, concocting the ghost ship narrative to claim salvage rights. But a full investigation cleared them of wrongdoing. Their honesty was upheld. They were awarded only a fraction of what they might have hoped, because the courts, like the public, were deeply unnerved by how little could be explained. Theories turned stranger as years passed. Some suggested a giant squid had attacked the lifeboat, others posited alien abduction, and still others claimed supernatural forces, that the Mary Celeste had crossed into a thin place, where reality frays and her crew had slipped into another world. These ideas are more folklore than fact, but they hint at something deeper, a ship moving patiently with the wind, waiting for people who would never return. We are used to thinking of the ocean's danger in terms of storms and sharks and sinking ships. But the Mary Celeste reminds us of a different kind of fear, the fear of vanishing without trace, of being erased without struggle. In the end, the ship herself was not cursed. After the incident, she was sold and sailed under various captains. But the shadow of her ghost story followed her. She was never quite able to escape her own myth. Eventually, she ran aground off the coast of Haiti in 1885. Some say it was an attempt at insurance fraud. Others think the ship was finally just tired, her frame rotting, her name heavy, her time over. But the story has not ended. More than 150 years later, the Mary Celeste still floats through our cultural memory, a symbol of unresolved mystery, a ship that, despite the calm seas and competent crew, was left to wander alone. And maybe that's what chills us the most, that we can do everything right, choose the best people, sail on the clearest day in the best vessel, and still vanish into silence. Not because of failure, but because the unknown, like the sea, has its own tides that pull even the prepared into depths we cannot chart. Tonight, as your breath slows and the world softens around you, imagine her again, the Mary Celeste, quiet quiet, adrift, waiting in the fog, still searching for her lost crew. A ghost ship, not because she is haunted, but because she is empty. Because she holds questions no one can answer. Because she floats between what we know and what we fear.
Part 5. The SS Aurang Medan, a final transmission from the dead. The sea holds many secrets, but few stories are as haunting and baffling as that of the SS Aurang Medan. Unlike other maritime mysteries that revolve around disappearances, this one begins with a cry for help, a message intercepted across crackling radios in 1947, when the world was still trembling from the shadows of the Second World War. What followed was a rescue attempt that turned into a ghost story, a tale that would never find a solid answer. A ship full of dead men, their faces frozen in terror. A final message from a silent vessel, and then fire, silence, and nothing left behind. The distress call came on a clear day, somewhere in the Strait of Malacca, the busy stretch of water between Malaysia and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Several ships in the vicinity reported receiving a strange broken Morse code signal. The source identified itself as the SS Aurang Medan, a Dutch freighter. The first message was simple, yet terrifying. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. The transmission paused for a moment, then continued with one final phrase, "I die," and then radio silence. The message sent ripples of fear and urgency through the ships that received it. The coordinates were logged. A nearby American vessel, the Silver Star, changed course and sped toward the location, hoping to find survivors or at least understand what had happened. When the Silver Star arrived, they found the Aurang Medan adrift. No signs of life on deck, no signal of distress from the ship, just stillness and an eerie sense of unease. The crew of the Silver Star boarded the ship cautiously. What they found would stay with them forever. The entire crew of the Aurang Medan was dead. Bodies were scattered across the decks, in the corridors, on the bridge. Some were lying flat, others frozen in grotesque poses, arms outstretched, as if fending off something invisible. Their faces were twisted in expressions of horror, wide eyes, gaping mouths, as if they had seen something unimaginable in their final moments. Even the ship's dog, they said, was found dead, teeth bared, snarling at the air, and yet there were no signs of violence, no wounds, no blood, no physical trauma. The ship itself had not been damaged. It was as if death had simply arrived in an instant and taken them all at once. Below deck, the temperature was unusually cold. Despite the warm tropical weather, the engine room was silent, the boiler was off, the ship had gone dead, and so had everyone aboard. The Silver Star's crew began preparations to tow the ship back to port, but they didn't get far. Just as they secured the lines, smoke began rising from the Aurang Medan's hold. Within moments, fire broke out. The crew barely had time to cut the tow lines and retreat before the ship exploded. The blast tore through the hull, engulfing the vessel in flame. And then, just like that, the Aurang Medan sank into the sea, taking its secrets with it. What had killed the crew? Why were their faces contorted in terror? Why did the ship suddenly catch fire after lying dormant for hours? And where had it come from? No shipping registry listed the Aurang Medan as an active vessel. No family members ever came forward to ask what happened. It was as if the ship had appeared only to die, a ghost built for a single message and a single moment. Speculation has never ceased. Some believe the ship was smuggling dangerous chemicals, possibly potassium cyanide or nitroglycerin, and that a leak in the hold released a toxic vapor that suffocated the crew. This could explain the sudden deaths and the fire, especially if sea moisture interacted with the cargo. Others suggested carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty boiler system, though this doesn't account for the expressions of fear or the chilling cold. Some thought it was a secret military vessel, perhaps carrying weapons or biological agents left over from the war. And then, of course, there are the more chilling possibilities, that the crew witnessed something not meant to be seen, that the ship itself was cursed, or that it had sailed into a place where death was waiting. Maritime folklore from Southeast Asia is rich with stories of haunted waters, of cursed vessels, and of islands that don't exist on any map. In the years following the incident, some whispered that the ship had carried more than chemicals, that it had been transporting something dark, something not of this world. A relic, a presence, a force, and that the crew had succumbed not to poison but to terror. Even the ship's name adds to the mystery.
Orang Medan loosely translates to man from Medan, referring to the city on Sumatra's northern coast, but no records exist of a ship registered there under that name. Some claim the entire incident was a cover-up, fabricated or altered to obscure some deeper truth. Journalists and researchers over the decades have tried to verify the existence of the Orang Medan. Some documents have surfaced, only to vanish or be discredited. Others claim to have traced it to a port in the Netherlands, but nothing conclusive ever sticks. What we are left with is a phantom, an event with no firm grounding, yet too detailed, too persistent to be wholly fabricated. The distress signal was real. Multiple ships logged it, the Silver Star's account was recorded, the explosion, the fire, the eerie silence, all documented. And yet, like so many maritime mysteries, the deeper you dig, the more it slips away. It's as if the story itself is protected, wrapped in fog and flame, never allowing a full answer. Some nights, sailors still speak of the Orang Medan. They tell the story not as history, but as a warning that the sea holds not only danger, but madness. That sometimes you'll hear a message, faint and crackling, begging for help. And if you find the source, you may regret answering. Because what waits on the other end is not always meant to be known, and perhaps that's the most terrifying part. Not that the crew died, but that they saw something before they did. That their mouths twisted in screams they couldn't release, and their eyes widened not from pain, but from what they saw in the final seconds before silence. The SS Orang Medan is gone now, burned, sunken, forgotten in the currents. But her last message drifts still, like a ghost wave across time. I die. Then nothing. Part 6. The cursed wreck of the Texing. The sea is filled with echoes of lost voyages, but some seem burdened with more than just misfortune. They carry the weight of old curses, ancient greed and unresolved suffering. One such ship is the Texing, often called the Titanic of the East. Its name means true star, but what it became is one of the deadliest maritime disasters in recorded history. And yet, the tragedy alone isn't what haunts the Texing's memory. It's the eerie quiet of its rediscovery over 160 years later, and the questions that came with it. For when the Texing was finally found, it was not just the bones of a wreck that were uncovered, but the ghost of a calamity that still refuses to rest. The Texing set sail in 1822 from the port of Amoy, modern-day Xiamen, in China. It was a massive junk, a type of ancient Chinese sailing ship, over 160 feet long with a broad hull and towering masts. On board were over 1,600 people, mostly Chinese immigrants, heading to Batavia, now Jakarta, Indonesia, in hopes of building new lives in distant lands. Along with them came a fortune in porcelain, silk, and trade goods, packed tightly into the ship's lower holds. By all accounts, it was a voyage of hope. Families seeking futures, traders transporting wealth, a floating city of dreams carved from wood and rope. But something always felt off about the Texing. According to maritime law passed down through Indonesian sailors, a ship overloaded with human desire, greed, ambition, fear, could call down its own ruin. And the Texing was very full. Too full. Far more than its original design could safely carry. Passengers were crammed into narrow spaces, and cargo was packed so densely that it reduced the vessel's balance and maneuverability. Still, the ship left Amoy under clear skies, making its way through the South China Sea, and threading its route along the Gaspar Strait, a narrow and treacherous waterway between the islands of Bangka and Belitung. It was on the night of February 6, 1822, under a moonless sky, that disaster struck. The Texing, unable to navigate the dangerous reefs and currents, ran aground on the Belvedere Reef. There was no warning, just a sudden sickening grind as the ship's belly tore open on the sharp coral. In moments, the massive junk began to list and fracture. Water poured into the cargo holds, tilting the boat and throwing its human cargo into chaos. There were no lifeboats, no structured evacuation. The sea was merciless, and the darkness total. Some clung to pieces of wood. Others screamed and prayed, but in the end, over 1,400 souls were lost. It became one of the deadliest shipwrecks in maritime history, largely forgotten by the Western world until its bones were uncovered over a century and a half later. In 1999, a team led by salvage expert Michael Hatcher discovered the wreck by accident while searching for sunken Chinese treasure ships. What they found beneath the coral and sediment stunned them. The Texing's cargo was largely intact, with over 350,000 pieces of porcelain perfectly preserved in the silence of the deep, bowls, plates, vases, all sealed in the mud, like offerings left at a submerged shrine. But there was something else down there too, something less expected. Skeletons, hundreds of them, tangled in the wreckage. Some locked in what looked like desperate final embraces, others curled alone near the shattered bulkheads. Hatcher and his team noted an unusual stillness about the site. Unlike other wrecks, where natural erosion and marine life disturbed the remains, the Texing lay quiet, its dead undisturbed. It was as though the sea itself had sealed the site shut, preserving it as a mass grave. And those who entered it described a strange heaviness, like they weren't entirely alone. Divers began to report unusual sensations. Sudden temperature drops, equipment malfunctioning without reason. Some claimed they heard strange noises through their masks, distant whispers, like voices carried by the current. Others described feelings of pressure, as though something unseen pressed against them, warning them not to stay long. These reports were never officially documented in the recovery logs, but the stories spread quickly among the crew. Enough that some refused to dive again. The porcelain haul was eventually brought to the surface and sold at auction. Buyers flocked to the so-called Texing cargo, eager to claim a piece of history. But among collectors, a rumor began to circulate. Some pieces, they said, brought bad luck. Objects would shatter on their own. Illnesses would follow their arrival. One collector in Europe claimed that after displaying a Texing vase in his home, he suffered a series of unexplainable health issues and terrifying dreams of drowning. Another said the bowl they purchased seemed to hum faintly in the night, though no sound was ever recorded. Of course, skeptics dismissed these stories. Coincidence, they said. Psychological suggestion. The human mind is powerful, especially when wrapped in tragedy. But to others, the explanation was simpler. The Texing had been disturbed. Its grave had been opened, and the dead, still restless, followed the fragments of their final journey into the living world. Maritime folklore has always warned against taking from cursed waters. Not all wrecks are just ruins. Some are sealed stories, meant to remain untouched. The Texing wasn't just a ship, it was a floating tomb. A collective coffin for hundreds who died in fear and darkness. And perhaps in raising its bones, we tore something open that should have stayed closed. Today, the Texing wreck lies broken beneath the reef. The porcelain is gone. The bones, now known, remain scattered beneath the sea. But divers still report unease near the site. Locals avoid the reef entirely, calling it the place where the stars sank. Some say on quiet nights, you can still hear echoes of the cries that rose from the water that moonless night in 1822. It's not the kind of story that ends, not the kind you can solve. Like so many shipwrecks, the Texing's tale is preserved not in answers but in silence. In the hush that follows too many voices crying out at once. In the stillness that remains after the ocean swallows them whole. And in the uneasy feeling that sometimes, the dead don't like to be disturbed.
Part 7. The ghost ship of the MV Lvov Orlova began her life in 1976, a sturdy Yugoslavian-built cruise ship named after a beloved Soviet film actress. For decades she sailed the frozen waters of Antarctica, ferrying passengers on expensive adventure expeditions through the harsh southern seas. She was not luxurious, but she was tough. Designed to break through ice, she carried tourists where few ships dared to go. But as the decades passed, her paint began to peel. Her engines stuttered. By the early 2000s, she had become a relic, a ship more at home in memory than motion. In 2010, docked in Newfoundland and long past her prime, the Lvov Orlova was seized for debts owed by her owners. Her crew, unpaid and angry, abandoned her. For 2 years, she sat in legal limbo, her hull rusting in the cold Atlantic air, her decks creaking in the wind. Then in 2012, a buyer stepped in. The plan was simple: tow her to the Dominican Republic, scrap her for parts, and let the Lvov Orlova fade away in pieces. But the ocean had other plans. On January 23, 2013, the Lvov Orlova was towed out of St. John's Harbor, connected to a tugboat by thick industrial cables. For a while, everything went smoothly. Then just one day into the journey, disaster struck. Heavy seas rocked the tug. The tow line snapped. The Lvov Orlova was set adrift in the open Atlantic, with no crew, no power, and no way to steer.
At first, authorities promised a quick recovery, but the weather worsened. The tug couldn't safely reconnect. The drifting vessel was now a danger to other ships. So Canadian authorities made a controversial decision. They let her go. For weeks, the Lvov Orlova floated aimlessly, pushed by wind and current into the vastness of the North Atlantic. Satellite tracking suggested she was heading east, perhaps toward Europe. Then the signals stopped. The ship was gone. No distress beacons, no radar returns, no visual sightings. Just open water where a 300-foot vessel had once been. Maritime officials speculated she had sunk. Maybe in a storm, maybe capsized by the ice she once sailed through. The file was quietly closed, but the Lvov Orlova was not done. In early 2014, a signal was detected. A faint blip picked up off the coast of Ireland. It matched one of the ship's emergency beacons, one designed to activate only when submerged in water. But no wreckage was ever found. No oil slick, no debris. The beacon itself went silent again, as quickly as it had spoken. Some experts suggested the device had dislodged and floated on its own. Others weren't so sure. The Lvov Orlova, it seemed, had resurfaced, or at least a part of her had. This was when the real legends began. Tabloids ran wild with stories. They claimed the Lvov Orlova was still out there, intact, silent, and inhabited only by rats. Not ordinary rats, but cannibal rats. Generations of them, feeding on each other, multiplying in the darkness of the hull. The idea was lurid, almost cinematic, a ghost ship with no soul aboard but a self-devouring swarm of survivors. Scientists and skeptics dismissed it. No food source, they said. Rats wouldn't last that long at sea. But the image stuck. The Lvov Orlova had become something more than a ship. She was now a drifting nightmare, a maritime urban legend updated for the digital age. Yet behind the sensationalism, the core mystery remains. How can a vessel of that size simply vanish? Ships sink, yes, but they leave signs. Debris, emergency signals, sonar echoes. The Lvov Orlova left none. Search planes found nothing. Fishing boats reported no sightings. For all our modern technology, this steel leviathan had slipped through the cracks of our surveillance. Not once, but multiple times. Some theories emerged. Perhaps she was taken by rogue waves, those sudden monsters of the sea known to rise unexpectedly and sink even the strongest ships. Others suggested she ran aground on a remote reef, smashed silently in the dark. A few whispered about darker possibilities: piracy, secret scrapping, even governmental involvement. One theory posits that she was intentionally scuttled to avoid legal liability, her transponders turned off, her secrets sinking with her. But none of these ideas come with proof, only questions. And so the Lvov Orlova lingers, not in port, not in scrap, but in the realm of half-glimpsed truths. Every few months rumors surge again. A grainy image, a sailor's tale, a radar ping, always inconclusive, always just out of reach. It's as if the ship doesn't want to be found. As if some part of it enjoys the drift, the myth, the freedom. Maritime folklore thrives on ships like this. Not ancient galleons or treasure boats, but the ones that remind us how fragile control really is. That even in the 21st century, we can still lose something as large as a building in the ocean's endless churn, that we can forget, for just long enough, that the sea still has secrets. To this day, the fate of the Lvov Orlova remains officially unresolved. It's listed as missing, presumed sunk, but no one really knows for sure. Perhaps she lies at the bottom, broken and still. Perhaps she was scrapped in silence, her parts scattered and sold. Or perhaps, just perhaps, she's still out there, drifting beyond the shipping lanes, cloaked in fog, unmoored from time, carrying only echoes and rust, and maybe something else. Not every ship needs to be ancient to be haunted. Some are cursed not by myth, but by abandonment. And in that abandonment, they gather stories. The Lvov Orlova isn't just a wreck, she's a ghost in waiting, and somewhere beyond where our maps go blank, she may still be sailing, alone. Part 8. The vanishing of the SS Waratah, Australia's Titanic of the tropics. In 1909, a magnificent ship set sail from South Africa to Australia. She was the pride of her fleet, a vessel designed to carry passengers and cargo across the Indian Ocean in luxury and safety. Her name was the SS Waratah, and she was built to inspire confidence, new, powerful, elegant. But within months of her maiden voyage, the Waratah vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no survivors. Not even a distress call. Over a century later, the Waratah's disappearance remains one of the ocean's most chilling mysteries, a ghost ship story not born from legend, but from a sudden and permanent silence. The Waratah was constructed in Glasgow in 1908 by the Blue Anchor Line, a company that prided itself on transporting both goods and people between Europe, South Africa, and Australia. Named after an Australian flower, the Waratah was meant to be the floating embodiment of progress. At 465 feet long with twin masts and a single funnel, she could carry nearly 700 people, some in first-class elegance, others in more modest accommodations. She was outfitted with electric lighting, refrigeration, cargo holds for wool and wine, and lavish lounges for her wealthier passengers. She was in many ways a precursor to the Titanic, less famous but no less ambitious. The Waratah's maiden voyage began in November 1908, from London to Cape Town, and then on to Sydney. She made the journey without incident. Though the seas tested her, the ship handled well. Mostly, there were whispers, hushed concerns from crew and passengers alike, that she had a tendency to roll uncomfortably in rough waters. A few even claimed she seemed top-heavy, prone to an uneasy sway. But no formal complaints were lodged. She was new, she was strong. Any issues could be attributed to the learning curve of a ship still settling into herself. In July 1909, the Waratah completed her second voyage to Australia and prepared to return to England via South Africa. She docked in Durban, loaded with cargo and new passengers, and departed on July 26. Her next scheduled stop was Cape Town. It was a leg of the journey that should have taken only a couple of days. She never arrived. On July 27th, another ship, the Clan McIntyre, was sailing the same route along South Africa's treacherous wild coast. As she moved through thick weather and rising seas, the crew spotted a ship on the horizon, steaming steadily in the same direction. The vessel looked similar to the Waratah, but before the McIntyre could confirm the sighting, the ship vanished into the storm and was never seen again. What followed was one of the most exhaustive sea searches of the early 20th century. Naval vessels, merchant ships, and private craft scoured the route between Durban and Cape Town. Weeks turned into months. Messages were sent to every port along the African coast, hoping she had limped into shelter unnoticed. But the Waratah had left no sign, no wreckage, no lifeboats, no oil slick. She had vanished so completely that some began to question whether she had sunk at all, or if perhaps she had been hijacked or suffered a mutiny. More than 200 people were aboard, crew members, families, businessmen, women and children. Among them was a famous Australian explorer and geologist, Professor David, who disembarked just before the Waratah's final departure. He later said he had felt a strange unease aboard the ship, a sensation that something was not quite right. He spoke of its instability, its odd lurching in calm seas, and confessed to a sense of relief when he chose not to reboard. Others had reported similar feelings. But with the ship gone, these impressions became omens, warnings that had gone unheeded. Investigations followed, theories multiplied. Some claimed the Waratah had been sunk by a rogue wave, one of those rare towering walls of water that rise without warning and crush even the strongest ships. Others suspected the vessel had capsized due to its design, too much weight high in the structure, too little stability in its hull. The government held an inquiry, which ended without conclusion. The ship's blueprints were studied, weather patterns analyzed, testimonies reviewed. Still, nothing definitive emerged. In the decades since, expeditions have returned to the wild coast, searching the seabed with sonar and submersibles. Some claim to have located pieces of a wreck in the 1990s, deep beneath the waves, in a region so turbulent that divers could not safely confirm the find. Others remain skeptical. The Indian Ocean is vast and merciless, especially along that stretch of shoreline. Ships disappear there with eerie regularity. The Waratah's final resting place remains officially unknown, but the mystery of the Waratah is more than a missing ship. It's the ghost of a story cut short, the abrupt silence of voices that had been full of laughter and conversation just hours before. It's the way the Waratah was seen steaming confidently through the mist, only to dissolve as if the sea had swallowed her whole. There are no final moments, no clear tragedy to pin the blame on. Just the unanswered question that every mariner fears: how does something so large, so full of life, disappear without a trace? Some believe the Waratah remains afloat in a more spectral sense. that her image appears to other ships in the mist, an echo of her final journey, still playing on repeat. Sailors have long told stories of seeing a grand vessel on the horizon near the wild coast, sailing silently before vanishing in a blink. They say it looks too real to be imagined, but never lasts long enough to be confirmed. A phantom of the Waratah, perhaps gliding eternally along the route she never completed. Others believe the ship rests at the bottom, buried under sand and coral, her secret sealed in pressure and darkness. If she lies there, she holds within her the final thoughts of her passengers, the creak of her walls as she took on water, the moment her lights went out. Until she is found, if she is ever found, those sounds are lost to the sea, and so the Waratah becomes a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of the ocean's quiet authority. Its ability to erase, to withhold, to keep its own counsel. The Waratah is often called the Titanic of the Southern Hemisphere, but in truth her story is quieter. There is no grand disaster, no iceberg, no final signal, only stillness. Only the open sea. Her story isn't one of collision, but of absence, a vanishing that reminds us how thin the boundary is between safety and loss, between presence and myth. Ships are meant to arrive, to return, to send word. The Waratah did none of these, and so she lives on, not in photographs or recovered artifacts, but in the minds of those who wait for ships that never come home.
Part 9. The Ghosts of the Octavius. A frozen ship and a timeless death at sea. The legend of the Octavius drifts somewhere between whispered folklore and eerie possibility, the kind of tale that resurfaces in lonely ports and cold libraries, passed from sailor to sailor, reader to reader, with a chill that lingers long after the story ends. It's said to be one of the oldest and most disturbing ghost ship stories ever recorded. A ship found adrift, its crew dead and frozen, yet perfectly preserved. Their lives paused in a silent, icy tableau. Whether myth or memory, the Octavius offers a glimpse into the most unforgiving truth of the sea. Time itself can freeze, and a ship may complete a voyage long after its crew has turned to ghosts. The story begins in the mid-18th century, at a time when daring merchant ships were pushing into more dangerous waters in search of faster trade routes. According to reports dating back to 1775, the Octavius had departed London in 1761, bound for the Orient with a full cargo hold and a seasoned crew. She reached her destination in the east, completed her business, and prepared for the long journey home. But her captain, bold or reckless, made a decision that would forever seal her fate. He chose to attempt the Northwest Passage, an icy, uncharted route across the top of North America. If successful, it would shave weeks off the voyage. But the Arctic is no place for gambles. No one heard from the Octavius again. Months turned into years. The ship never arrived in London. She was presumed lost, taken by ice, her crew buried under snow and sea. But in 1775, 14 years after she vanished, a whaling vessel off the coast of Greenland came across a strange sight. A three-masted ship, sails tattered but still aloft, drifted silently through the frigid water. There were no flags, no signs of life, yet the ship seemed intact. The whalers boarded her cautiously, expecting disaster. What they found was far worse. Inside the Octavius, everything was eerily still. The air was dry and frozen. The interior showed no signs of violence or chaos. The crew had not abandoned ship. They were still there, frozen, lifeless, seated exactly where they had last been alive. Men lay in their bunks, hands folded over blankets stiff with frost. A cabin boy was found clutching a tinderbox, as if he'd frozen mid-motion. But the most haunting discovery came in the captain's quarters. There, seated at his desk, the captain was found with a pen still in hand, his logbook open before him, the ink frozen in place. He was preserved with such clarity, it seemed he might look up at any moment. His wife and child were discovered nearby, bundled in furs, embraced against the cold that had claimed them both. Time had stopped inside the Octavius, and the ship had become a tomb adrift at sea. Even more unsettling was the discovery in the ship's log. The last recorded entry was dated 1762, just 1 year after the Octavius had set off on her return voyage. That meant the ship had been drifting through the Arctic, unmanned and undisturbed, for 13 years before the whalers found her. She had completed the Northwest Passage, but too late for her crew to see it. The whalers, frightened by what they had seen, took only the logbook and fled.
Some say they attempted to tow the Octavius, but the weather turned and they were forced to let her go. Others claim they left her immediately, convinced she was cursed. Whatever the truth, the Octavius was never seen again. The logbook, if it ever made it to shore, vanished into private hands or dusty archives. No official record remains, only the retellings. Skeptics argue the story is apocryphal, mariners' lore shaped over time to warn against hubris or the danger of frozen seas. But elements of the story persist in too many forms to be ignored. Variations appear in maritime logs, oral histories, and even early newspaper accounts, each version adding or omitting details but preserving the central horror: a ship, a voyage, a crew frozen in time. Even without definitive proof, the story refuses to disappear. It clings to our collective imagination, like frost on glass. Some theorists have tried to rationalize the tale. They suggest the Octavius might have been trapped in pack ice shortly after entering the Arctic, the crew succumbing to exposure as temperatures dropped and hope faded. The ship, sealed in ice, could have drifted with the polar currents for years, eventually thawing enough to break free and continue drifting southward toward Greenland. The preservation of the bodies, while extreme, would be consistent with the deep freeze of the Arctic. Under such conditions, death becomes suspension, stillness becomes permanence. But logic can only go so far. There's something else in the story of the Octavius that logic cannot touch. The image of a captain frozen at his logbook, pen in hand, finishing his duties even as death closed in around him. The sense of an invisible line being crossed, the boundary between man's will and the sea's indifference. The idea that a ship can finish its journey, long after her crew has turned to statues of ice and silence. And then there's the question no one can answer. Why did the Octavius drift alone for so long, unseen and untouched? The North Atlantic is a busy place. Even in the 18th century, whalers, merchants and explorers crowded the same waters. Yet no one spotted her, no one boarded her. She simply returned when she was ready, perhaps to tell a story no one wanted to hear. In the world of ghost ships, the Octavius stands apart. She is not merely abandoned or wrecked, she is preserved, a time capsule of frozen death, a ship that refused to decay. No storm tore her apart, no waves dragged her under. She simply drifted, quietly, endlessly, until the day she was seen. And then just as quietly, she disappeared again. To this day, sailors speak of ships caught in ice, of silent white walls rising from the horizon like mountains, of still waters broken only by the creak of wood and the occasional cry of a bird. Some swear they've seen the Octavius, her masts cutting through fog like a memory half remembered, a phantom ship still seeking port, still chasing a route that claimed her soul long ago. And if she is real, if somewhere out in the Arctic, locked beneath a shelf of ice, the Octavius still waits, then her story is not over. It waits with her, as frozen as the day she was found. A haunting reminder that the sea does not forget. It merely waits, silently, patiently, for us to remember. Part 10. The Eliza Battle, Flames on the River and the Phantom Ship of Alabama. The Black Warrior River winds through the heart of Alabama, like a ribbon of time, carrying with it memories of trade, toil, and tragedy. Along its dark waters, whispers persist of a ghostly steamboat still seen at night, ablaze with fire yet never consumed. It's a tale that has haunted generations of riverfolk, a story of a ship named the Eliza Battle, which met a fiery end in the cold spring of 1858. To this day, some claim to see her still, flames licking her masts, music echoing over the water, a spectral reminder of the night. A floating palace became a riverbound grave. The Eliza Battle was once the pride of the Tombigbee and Black Warrior Rivers, a sidewheel steamer that carried passengers and cargo between Mobile and Columbus. Built for elegance and luxury, she was more than just a vessel, she was an event. Her decks bustled with wealthy cotton merchants and dignitaries, while the sounds of music and laughter floated from her grand salons. Lanterns flickered warmly against polished wood, crystal chandeliers shimmered over fine banquets. The Eliza Battle was a marvel of southern comfort, gliding through the wilderness with opulence that seemed untouched by danger. But the river, like the sea, keeps its secrets and its power. On the night of March 1, 1858, the Eliza Battle departed from Columbus on what was supposed to be a routine journey downstream. Her decks were heavy with cotton bales, stacked high and tightly packed. The weather had turned colder than expected, a biting wind sweeping over the water, passengers bundled in their coats, huddling inside for warmth, unaware that the very cargo beneath them would soon become a death trap. Around midnight, as the steamer approached a bend in the river near the town of Pennington, flames were spotted on the lower deck. It's believed that a lantern fell or a spark caught hold of the dry cotton. Whatever the cause, the fire spread quickly, too quickly. Within minutes the blaze was raging across the deck, fed by the wind and the tightly packed fuel. The Eliza Battle was transformed from a grand floating home into a blazing inferno. Panic erupted. The flames cut off access to lifeboats and lifelines. The river was icy cold, and the surrounding forests offered no refuge. Some passengers leapt into the water, desperate to escape the fire. Others became trapped on the upper decks, screaming for help as the blaze closed in. Survivors would later describe the sight of figures silhouetted against the flames, dancing like ghosts, before vanishing into smoke or plunging into the black river below. The captain and crew did what they could. Some rushed to save passengers, throwing planks and makeshift rafts into the water. Others attempted to steer the burning ship to shore, but the current was too strong, the fire too fast. By dawn, the Eliza Battle was a charred skeleton drifting in silence, its once proud frame reduced to ash and scorched metal. More than 30 people died that night, their bodies later recovered along the riverbanks, or never found at all. The final death toll was never certain, as some travelers had boarded without being logged, and the chaos made counting impossible. The story might have ended there, another river tragedy lost to history, but it didn't. In the years that followed, strange sightings began to emerge. Riverboat pilots, fishermen and townsfolk began reporting a ghostly vision near the site of the disaster. They spoke of a steamboat, identical in shape to the Eliza Battle, appearing on misty nights when the river ran cold and quiet. They saw flames dancing along its decks, but the fire never spread, never consumed. Music sometimes accompanied the vision, faint, sorrowful strains of a fiddle or piano drifting across the water, as if the party on board continued despite the flames. Those who witnessed the ghost ship said it moved with eerie grace, silent save for the crackle of phantom fire. Some claimed to see figures standing at the railings, their faces pale, clothes untouched by flame. Others described hearing cries from the riverbanks, as if voices from the past were still pleading for rescue. But the vision never lasted long. It would fade into the fog, disappearing as suddenly as it came, leaving behind only the sound of ripples and the memory of terror. Skeptics wrote it off as imagination or superstition, heat, lightning, mist, the tricks of the river. But the sightings continued. Over the decades, more than a dozen reputable river pilots swore they had seen the Eliza Battle on fire. Their reports were consistent in detail, and most occurred near the anniversary of the disaster. One account, written in 1910, describes a pilot who saw the burning ship as he rounded the bend near Pennington. He had to steer clear, thinking at first it was a real emergency, until he saw it vanish into thin air, leaving no smoke, no wreckage, no scent of fire. In time, the legend took root. Locals began to avoid the riverbend near the site on cold March nights. Children were told stories of the Eliza Battle as cautionary tales, lessons about fire, water, and the delicate edge between safety and doom. Yet the legend also became a point of fascination. Some embraced it, holding seances or ghost hunting tours in search of the phantom steamer. Others honored it quietly, leaving flowers or small offerings near the shore. But beneath the ghost story lies a deeper truth. The Eliza Battle was not just a tale of supernatural flame, it was a tragedy of real people, many of them nameless, who perished in one of Alabama's greatest disasters. The haunting may be fiction, but the loss was fact, and perhaps that's why the vision persists. It is not merely a ghost but a memory made visible, a sorrow that refuses to sink. Some say that hauntings are not spirits but echoes, emotional imprints left behind by trauma too deep to fade. If that's true, then the Eliza Battle is a perfect echo. Her story rings out each year on the river wind, a soundless alarm reminding all who hear it that the line between celebration and catastrophe is thinner than we care to admit. And so the Black Warrior River holds her secret. At night, when the mist curls low and the wind dies down, it's said you can still see the flames, brief flickering as if trying to warm the past. Whether you believe it's a ghost ship or a trick of the water, one thing is certain: something lingers on that bend in the river, something that remembers.
Part 11. The Ghost Ship of the Arctic, SS Beishimo's Endless Drift. The story of the SS Beishimo is one that drifts like ice across the surface of time, frozen in mystery, yet never still. This was no ordinary ghost ship tale whispered by fishermen in the dark. The Beishimo was seen, tracked, boarded, and then it vanished, again and again for nearly 40 years. Her legend is not born from fog or fire, but from the cold, biting silence of the Arctic, where abandoned things rarely return. And yet she did, not once, but many times across decades. Her course seemingly controlled by no hand, her presence lingering like a question no one could answer. The SS Beishimo was built in 1914 in Sweden and operated by the Hudson's Bay Company. She was a sturdy steel cargo steamer, made for long northern voyages through rough and icy waters. She hauled fur, food and supplies to remote trading posts along the Canadian coastline and returned laden with pelts and other goods. Reliable, slow but strong. She was the kind of ship you didn't think twice about, until 1931, when the Arctic took her into its grip and never truly let her go. That fateful year, Beishimo was near Barrow, Alaska, caught in early ice. The crew, accustomed to tough voyages, assumed they'd be able to wait it out. Ice comes and goes, and the Beishimo had weathered winters before, but this time the freeze was quick, thick, and brutal. By October, the ship was immobilized, locked fast in a field of solid white. The Hudson's Bay Company arranged for an emergency evacuation of some crew, while others stayed behind to guard the valuable cargo. They set up camp near the ship, building shelters on the ice itself, just yards from where the Beishimo groaned under the pressure of the freeze. Then, as if the Arctic had decided to play its cruelest trick, the weather broke suddenly. A blizzard hit, intense, howling, the kind that shreds visibility and turns breath into knives. When the storm cleared, the Beishimo was gone. The crew assumed she had broken apart under the ice and sunk. Their camp became a mournful vigil, watching the place where their ship had been. But just days later, a local Inuit hunter came into the camp with incredible news. The Beishimo wasn't lost. She was adrift again, free of the ice, miles away from where she had been, still whole, still floating. The crew found her and boarded her again, amazed, but the incident had shaken their confidence. Winter was closing in, and it was clear the Beishimo couldn't be trusted to stay put. The company made the decision to offload the remaining cargo as best they could and abandon the ship for good. It seemed her useful days were over. She was left in the cold, to drift or to sink. Most expected her to be gone by spring, but the Beishimo didn't sink. In fact, she refused. Over the next year, and then the next, reports of her began to trickle in from whalers, trappers, and villagers. Sightings of a ghostly freighter drifting silently through the ice floes. No crew, no smoke from the stacks, no sign of life, only a steel hull cutting through Arctic fog, sometimes stuck in pack ice, sometimes free. Men boarded her and found her deserted but intact. Some tried to tow her, others used her as temporary shelter, but no one managed to reclaim her permanently. The Beishimo was always one step ahead of any attempt to capture her. In 1933 she was seen again, adrift near the Beaufort Sea. A group of Inuit boarded her for shelter during a storm. They lit a fire in the galley and spent the night. In the morning the weather cleared, but the ship had moved again. Like a wanderer with no home, she slipped through the ice before they could stop her. Other attempts were made in the years that followed. Once a crew set up camp aboard the Beishimo hoping to salvage her, only to be forced off by another sudden blizzard. By the time the sky cleared, she had drifted out of reach again. Throughout the 1940s and into the 1950s, she was spotted at least a dozen more times. Always abandoned, always seemingly seaworthy, always impossible to recover. She became a maritime myth that was somehow real. Maps marked her last known locations. The Hudson's Bay Company finally gave up, declaring her unsalvageable. Sailors began calling her the ghost ship of the Arctic. Though she wasn't a ghost in the usual sense, she was steel and iron, real and rusting, but unreachable. Perhaps the strangest part of the Beishimo's story is how long it continued. In 1962,
More than 30 years after she was first abandoned, she was seen again, drifting quietly near Alaska's northern coast. A year later, another report placed her near Point Barrow. Then in 1969, the last confirmed sighting occurred. A group of Inuit saw the Beishimo locked in ice, battered but still intact, and then nothing. After 1969, she vanished entirely. Not seen, not tracked, not found. Some say she finally sank, somewhere beneath the white silence, claimed at last by the ocean that had toyed with her for so long. Others believe she may still be out there, stuck in some hidden inlet or cove, a rusted monument to defiance. The Arctic is vast, remote, it guards its secrets jealously. A ship, even a steel one, could disappear for decades and never be found, unless it wants to be. There are those who think the Beishimo didn't just drift, but somehow she moved with intention, always evading recovery, always just beyond reach, as if the ship itself had memory or will. The idea seems absurd until you read the reports, the disappearances, the failed salvages, the blizzards that always came just in time to foil rescue, the sudden reappearances. If it wasn't luck or weather or coincidence, then what was it? In the quiet north, the people who live by the sea and ice do not scoff at such things. They speak of the Beishimo with respect, as if she were alive, as if she had chosen her path and was determined to follow it. Maybe she had carried too many hopes, too many goods, too many dreams and lives through dangerous waters. And when she was left to the cold, perhaps she became something else, an idea wrapped in iron, a story that wanted to keep being told. In the end, the Beishimo's mystery is not just that she was seen, it's that she was never understood. She refused to die, refused to be saved, and refused to stay still. For decades she haunted the Arctic not as a ghost, but as a question drifting through the ice. A question no one has yet answered. Part 12. The Carol A. Deering, a schooner's ghost crew, and the graveyard of the Atlantic. The ocean has long been a graveyard of dreams. But sometimes it doesn't just swallow a ship, it leaves it behind, stripped and silent, as if to remind us that the sea forgets nothing. Few wrecks echo that idea more than the story of the Carol A. Deering, a 5-masted schooner whose final voyage ended in one of the most haunting maritime puzzles in American history. She was found run aground on the treacherous Diamond Shoals off the coast of North Carolina in 1921, completely abandoned. No crew, no logbook, no lifeboats, just a meal left untouched in the galley, and a ship resting eerily intact, waiting for someone to ask what happened. The Carol A. Deering was a beautiful vessel, sleek and fast, constructed in 1919 during the final months of World War I. She was built for cargo, and built to last, meant to be a reliable workhorse for the booming trade routes of the East Coast. On her final journey, she was carrying coal from Virginia to Brazil. A routine run, captained by an experienced mariner named William H. Merritt, but Merritt fell ill shortly after departure, forcing the ship to dock in Delaware, where his replacement, Captain Willis Wormel, took over. Wormel was elderly but capable, having been at sea for decades. Along with him, the Deering had a crew of 10, mostly foreign sailors, and a first mate named Charles McClellan. Witnesses would later say there was tension between the crew and the new captain. Some claimed McClellan openly resented Wormel's authority. In Barbados, just a few weeks before the Deering would vanish, McClellan allegedly got drunk and complained about Wormel to other sailors, saying the crew didn't like the old man and that they were done with him. It was shrugged off at the time as drunken rambling, but in hindsight, the words feel heavier. The Deering was last sighted on January 28, 1921, by the Cape Lookout lightship off the coast of North Carolina. The crew member who hailed the lightship wasn't the captain, nor the first mate, but an unidentified crewman with a foreign accent. He claimed they had lost their anchors and needed help relaying a message to the ship's owners. Oddly, the lightship's radio had failed, so the message was never sent. Then, on January 31st, just 3 days later, the Deering was spotted run aground on the infamous Diamond Shoals, a stretch of shifting sandbars so deadly, it was nicknamed the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The Coast Guard couldn't immediately approach the wreck due to dangerous seas, but when they finally boarded the Deering on February 4th, what they found was eerie beyond explanation. The ship had been deliberately abandoned. The wheel was shattered. The binnacle box used to house the ship's compass was gone. The logbook and all navigational equipment were missing, so were the lifeboats. In the galley, food sat on the stove as if the crew had been preparing a meal and left suddenly. Personal belongings remained untouched, even the crew's boots were still on board. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-thought, mid-action, gone without a trace. The FBI was brought in, so was the Navy. The shipping company launched its own investigation. The theories began to swirl. One popular idea was mutiny, that McClellan and the crew had turned against the aging Captain Wormel, perhaps killed him, then fled in the lifeboats after running aground. But if that were true, why had they left all their possessions behind, and where did they go? No bodies ever washed ashore, no lifeboats were ever recovered, no one ever claimed responsibility or confessed. They had simply vanished, as if they had stepped off the edge of the world. Other theories were darker. Some suggested pirates. The early 1920s were a volatile time, with bootleggers and smugglers operating up and down the East Coast. The Deering, with her valuable cargo and international crew, may have attracted attention. Perhaps she was intercepted, boarded, and her crew either taken or executed. But again, there was no sign of struggle, no damage to the ship, no bullet holes, no blood, just silence. And then there were the stranger ideas, the ones that never quite left public imagination. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't a well-known concept yet, but the region where the Deering was sailing had already seen a string of mysterious disappearances. Some believed the crew had been caught in a freak natural phenomenon, a rogue wave or magnetic anomaly. Others pointed to paranormal theories, abduction by some unknown force, perhaps extraterrestrial or even dimensional. These ideas were dismissed by officials, but they lived on in whispers, in newspaper headlines, and in the collective memory of a nation that didn't know what to make of such a clean and total disappearance. What made the mystery worse was that the Deering wasn't alone. In the same period, several other ships vanished or were found abandoned in nearby waters, including the SS Hewitt, which disappeared around the same time without sending a distress call. It was as if something unseen was sweeping the coast, quietly removing ships and lives from the sea without leaving clues. Despite countless investigations, the fate of the Deering's crew has never been determined. Not a single trace of the men was ever found. Their names are still listed as lost at sea, though no one can say when or how. The wreck itself was destroyed in a controlled explosion later that year, deemed a hazard to other ships navigating the treacherous shoals, and with it went any chance of revisiting the scene for hidden clues. Today, the story of the Carroll A. Deering is remembered as one of the most chilling maritime disappearances in history, not because of fire or storms or explosions, but because of the quietness, the way everything was so intact, the way no one ever returned, the way it all felt like a story paused in the middle of a sentence. A ship once full of voices and direction, reduced to stillness and questions. The ocean, as always, offers no answers, only currents, echoes, and the occasional ship that drifts ashore with a mystery in its hull.
Part 13. The SS Bachimo, the ghost ship of the Arctic ice. In the frozen reaches of the Arctic Circle, where the sea itself hardens into walls of drifting ice and silence reigns beneath the wind, there drifts a ship that should not still exist. The SS Bachimo is a name that has echoed through maritime legend for nearly a century, not for the treasures it carried or the crew it lost, but for the way it refused to disappear. Long after it was presumed sunk, the Bachimo was seen again and again, drifting aimlessly through Arctic waters like a memory that refused to fade. A ship abandoned to the elements, but never claimed by them. A ghost ship, not just in metaphor but in behavior. It became a vessel of the impossible. The Bachimo was a steel-hulled cargo steamer built in Sweden in 1914. She was initially named Ångerman Alven and used by a German shipping company. But after World War I, she was passed to the British as part of war reparations and renamed. The Hudson's Bay Company took possession and used her for trade routes along the Canadian Arctic coast, moving between settlements to gather furs and deliver goods. For a ship of her time, she was hardy and dependable, made to navigate not open seas, but the drifting slabs of ice that could crush lesser vessels like paper. Her role was lifeline, her routine one of predictable passage, until one year she didn't return. In October 1931, Bachimo found herself trapped in early ice near the town of Barrow, Alaska.
The season had shifted quicker than expected, and the crew, familiar with the dangers of Arctic freeze, evacuated to the shore to wait out the ice. For days, the ship remained stuck, seemingly secure in the grip of the pack. The Hudson's Bay Company sent a rescue party, expecting to retrieve the valuable cargo of furs stored on board. A storm rolled in before they could act. When the sky cleared, the Beichimo was gone. The crew assumed it had sunk. The ice had swallowed hundreds of ships before, grinding them under pressure and pulling them down into the cold depths. But days later, a hunter spotted her adrift, miles from where she'd been imprisoned. She was still afloat, still intact, but deserted. The crew managed to board her again, retrieve the most valuable furs and salvage supplies, but they judged her too damaged to be sailed safely. They built a makeshift shelter nearby, deciding to ride out the winter and guard the remains of the ship from the shore. Then, on November 24th, another blizzard struck. When the winds finally died down, the Beichimo had vanished again, gone without warning, carried off by the ice like a child's toy. From that point forward, she became something more than a ship. She became a story. Over the next 4 decades, the Beichimo was sighted dozens of times. Inuit hunters would report a black silhouette against the ice, unmoving. Pilots flying low over the Beaufort Sea saw her frozen in place, then gone on the next pass. In 1933, a group of Alaskan natives boarded her during a brief thaw but found no sign of life. In 1939, another crew tried to claim her, only to be driven away by encroaching storms. In 1962, the crew of an icebreaker reported her drifting once again, always the same. No lights, no crew, no visible damage, just a vessel trapped in a loop, floating where no ship should survive. The ocean around Alaska is not kind to metal. The ice tears at hulls, the salt corrodes steel, and yet Beichimo endured. It was as if she had become untethered from the rules that govern other ships. Some tried to claim her, others attempted to tow her in. All failed. The ice always took her back. Those who got close often described a strange atmosphere on board, utter stillness, like a forgotten world preserved in frost. Rooms coated in ice, footprints in snow that began nowhere and led nowhere, tools rusted into place, plates still on tables. A ship paused in time, but with no memory of how or why. Theories began to swirl. Some believed she was cursed, either by the spirits of those who died aboard or by the land itself, an intruder in sacred territory. Others thought she was simply lucky, designed with uncanny resilience, and caught in currents that pulled her just enough to avoid destruction. But no one could explain why she never sank, why she was never found broken or capsized or run aground. She just kept moving. Each year, a little further, a little more north, as if she was searching for something, or perhaps running from something else. By the 1960s, her sightings became less frequent. The Arctic was changing. Ice patterns were shifting. Satellites began scanning the region, and yet she was never spotted from space. In 1969, she was seen for what may have been the last time, trapped in ice between Point Barrow and the Beaufort Sea. After that, the Beichimo vanished completely, not sunk, not confirmed destroyed, just gone. Some say she still floats, unseen in the deep north, shrouded by fog and moving silently through ice fields that haven't been charted. A metal ghost without a master, carrying the breath of its final crew in the frost that coats its railings. Some even claim she can be found if you go looking, if you sail far enough, wait long enough, drift silently enough, but only if she wants to be seen. The Beichimo, after all, was never truly lost. She was simply no longer part of the world we can measure. In the folklore of Arctic sailors and native tribes alike, she became more than a ship. She became a warning, a symbol that the sea does not always let go of what it claims, that some disappearances do not end in destruction, but in endless wandering, and that sometimes, the most terrifying thing the ocean can do is not to drown a ship, but to keep it. Let it drift on, alone for decades, outliving every sailor who ever stepped aboard, waiting in silence for someone to remember her name. SS Beichimo, the ghost that sails on. Part 14. The Palatine Light. Fire on the water off the coast of Rhode Island, near Block Island's northeast tip. There's a stretch of water that seems unusually restless. In winter, when the wind howls and the sea breaks against the rocks in foamy grey convulsions, islanders claim they see something strange out there, something glowing. A flickering light dances just above the surface, weaving in and out of the fog like a candle flame floating through the night. Some say it's the reflection of a distant boat. Others swear it's something far older, a ship engulfed in flame, silent and adrift, repeating its last night forever. The locals call it the Palatine Light, and it is said to be the ghost of a real ship, the Princess Augusta, consumed by fire and betrayal nearly 3 centuries ago. In December of 1738, the Princess Augusta, a German immigrant ship bound for Philadelphia, became trapped off the American coast after a long and brutal voyage. She'd departed from Rotterdam months earlier, overcrowded and under-provisioned. Her passengers were German Palatines, fleeing war and religious persecution. Nearly 200 of them, men, women and children, all packed below deck, hoping for a new life across the ocean. But what met them instead was one of the deadliest passages in colonial history. From the start, the voyage was plagued. Food ran low within weeks. Disease, dysentery, typhus, fever, swept through the decks. Corpses were thrown overboard daily. The ship's captain, a man named Andrew Brooke, reportedly hoarded supplies for himself and his crew while the passengers starved. By the time they reached the waters off New England, over half the people aboard had died. Those who remained were barely clinging to life. And then came the storm. Off the coast of Rhode Island, the Princess Augusta was caught in violent winter winds. The sails tore, the rudder broke, ice formed along the masts. With the ship no longer steerable, it drifted helplessly toward the coast. Eventually she ran aground near Block Island. The locals saw her appear from the fog like an apparition, battered, barely afloat, filled with the cries of the dying. Islanders rushed to help, pulling the survivors to safety, bringing them to shore, trying to give them warmth and food. But the horror wasn't over. Accounts vary from here. Some say the islanders were generous, that they did what they could to help the broken refugees. Others tell a darker story, that the survivors were robbed, that the ship was looted, that the remaining crew abandoned the passengers to freeze, and that someone for reasons unknown set fire to the ship once it was empty. Whether out of malice, fear of disease, or to hide something darker, no one knows. But as the flames consumed the vessel, lighting up the sky in red and gold, the image was burned into local memory. Some claimed they could hear screams from the ship, even though no one was aboard. Others swore they saw a woman still trapped inside, banging against a cabin window as the flames grew. Over time, this single night became a legend. Islanders began reporting the Palatine Light, a mysterious glow offshore that would appear around the anniversary of the wreck. Sometimes it was seen only briefly, like a flash of lantern fire. Other times it hovered on the horizon for hours, flickering like a candle caught in the wind. Sailors described it as a burning ship with no sound, no smoke, just fire. A silhouette in flames drifting silently before vanishing. For generations it was treated as a local omen. The Palatine Light was a sign that something was wrong or about to be. Writers and historians tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was St. Elmo's fire, a natural weather phenomenon, or swamp gas, or even a mirage caused by distant fishing boats. But these explanations never fully settled the matter, especially for those who claimed to have seen it up close. One fisherman said he sailed toward the light, only to find himself surrounded by dense fog and the overwhelming smell of burning wood. Another swore he heard voices calling from the sea, not shouting, whispering. In the 19th century, poet John Greenleaf Whittier visited the island and was so moved by the tale that he wrote a ballad about it, The Palatine. In his version, the ghost ship is real, a cursed vessel doomed to repeat its death over and over again. He writes of a figure seen on board, a woman with long dark hair, staring endlessly into the storm as the flames rise around her. Some believe this was based on eyewitness accounts from the time, though they are difficult to trace. Others think the story took root because of how real the fear felt. The Palatine Light, whether ghost or illusion, inspired awe and dread in equal measure. To this day the stories persist. Modern witnesses, some skeptical, some not, still report the light. Fishermen, tourists, islanders, all describing the same flickering glow in the same cursed stretch of sea. The US Coast Guard has received calls about a boat on fire near Block Island, only to find nothing. No wreck, no distress signal, just silence. And what of the Princess Augusta? Her bones are long gone, consumed by fire or the sea. But her legend remains, a ship of hope that became a ship of despair, a journey meant to bring life that instead delivered death. The suffering of its passengers, forgotten by history, lingers on in the minds of those who look out to sea on stormy nights and wonder what really happened out there. Was the fire an accident, a mercy, or something more sinister? Whatever the truth, the Palatine light continues to burn, an echo of a shipwreck that refuses to die, a ghost born from the sea and preserved by memory. And every year around December someone sees it again, a silent blaze in the dark, drifting just beyond reach, a reminder that some tragedies are never truly buried. They float, they burn, and they wait.
Part 15. The Ghosts of the SS Valencia. The west coast of Vancouver Island is a place of jagged cliffs, hidden coves, and constant fog. It's called the Graveyard of the Pacific for a reason. More than 2,000 ships have met their end along this treacherous coastline, torn apart by storms, hidden rocks, and the relentless pull of the tide. But few stories from this stretch of sea are as harrowing or as haunted as the story of the SS Valencia. A story not just of wreckage, but of visions, of silent lifeboats, and of a ship that seemed to refuse to let go of its dead. The Valencia was a steamship built in the late 19th century, originally used for service between New York and Venezuela. But by 1906, she'd been reassigned to the rugged waters of the Pacific Northwest, ferrying passengers between San Francisco and Seattle. Though she was not a luxurious vessel, she was dependable, until the night she strayed off course, into darkness and into legend. On January 20th, 1906, the Valencia left San Francisco with more than 170 souls aboard, men, women, and children bound northward. The weather turned foul as they neared the coast of Vancouver Island. Rain fell in sheets, winds howled, and visibility dropped to near zero. The captain, unsure of their exact position, made a fatal miscalculation. Just after midnight, the Valencia struck a reef near Pachena Point. The hull tore open, and seawater rushed in. Panic swept the ship. Lifeboats were lowered in chaos, with passengers slipping on the wet deck, screaming over the roar of the waves. Some boats capsized immediately, others vanished into the night, never to be seen again. The Valencia began to list, her bow pointing skyward as the stern was battered by the surf. Survivors clung to what they could, rigging, broken timbers, whatever kept them above the water. Daylight brought no salvation. The cliffs were steep, the shore unreachable. The telegraph lines along the coast were broken, and the nearest towns were too far to send help in time. A few brave men attempted to climb the cliffs, hoping to reach help, but most of them disappeared into the wilderness. Rescue vessels were dispatched as word finally reached Victoria, but the weather delayed their arrival. For the remaining passengers, many of them women and children, it was already too late. Witnesses from shore, watching through telescopes from the tops of cliffs, later described a haunting scene. Dozens of people clung to the ship's rigging, soaked, freezing, and exposed to the crashing surf for nearly 2 days. On the morning of January 24th, a massive wave swept the remaining structure away. Screams were heard as the last survivors were torn from the rigging and dragged under. Of the 174 people aboard, only 37 survived, almost all of them men who had managed to climb ashore in the first hours. No women or children made it. But what followed in the wake of the disaster is what truly cemented the Valencia's place in maritime legend. Over the months and years that followed, sailors and coastal residents began reporting strange occurrences, sightings that seemed impossible, yet persisted. Fishermen swore they saw a lifeboat, empty and intact, drifting through the mist with no one aboard. When approached, it vanished. One group claimed to see a longboat filled with skeletons near Barkley Sound, perfectly preserved bodies, seated upright, as if still waiting for rescue. But by the time authorities arrived, there was nothing there. Most haunting of all were the repeated sightings of the ship herself. Over and over, during storms or foggy nights, sailors reported seeing a steamship just off the coast near where the Valencia went down. The same outline, the same deck, even lights flickering on board, despite no source of power. Once a lighthouse keeper at Cape Beale insisted he saw figures on the deck of a phantom ship, passengers waving for help that would never come. When he signaled back, the lights faded into the night. Decades passed, but the reports did not stop. In 1933, nearly 30 years after the disaster, one of the Valencia's lifeboats was found washed up in a sea cave, remarkably well preserved, with its name still legible on the side. Inside were oars, ropes, and the remnants of supplies. No signs of life, no explanation for how it had survived so long, untouched.
Some claim the Valencia's final voyage had left an imprint on the coastline, a trauma so profound it echoed through time. Others believed it was more than memory, that the souls of those who died, especially the women and children who had no voice, lingered there, reliving their final moments as fog rolled in from the sea. The area became known not just for the wreck, but for the whispers that followed. Locals refused to sail near the site after dark. Stories were told in hushed tones, and some said that when the wind was just right, you could still hear cries carried over the waves. Today, the Valencia's story is a somber part of Canadian maritime history. A monument stands above the cliffs near Pachena Point, overlooking the spot where the ship went down. Few who visit can ignore the feeling that something is still there, not just the memory of the wreck, but a presence, cold, watching, waiting. The ocean gives and the ocean takes, but sometimes it holds on, sometimes it remembers, and sometimes it shows us what we're too afraid to see. The SS Valencia is no longer visible, but her ghost sails on, a warning, a mystery, and a sorrow that refuses to sink. Part 16. The wreck of the SS Kamloops and the frozen faces below in the vast icy heart of Lake Superior, a body of water so massive and violent it's often called an inland sea. There lies a wreck entombed in silence and mystery. The SS Kamloops, a freighter that vanished without a trace in the winter of 1927, became not only a symbol of the Great Lakes' deadly unpredictability, but the center of one of the most chilling and unsettling underwater ghost stories ever recorded. For while many ships have gone down in the cold depths of the Superior Basin, few have left behind a vision so haunting, so unexplainable, that divers still speak of it with reverence and unease. The face of a crewman, perfectly preserved, seemingly watching from the depths with open eyes. The Kamloops was a 250-foot-long steel freighter, part of a Canadian fleet hauling cargo between ports on the Great Lakes. She was built to endure rough water, slim enough to pass through narrow locks, yet sturdy enough to withstand high waves and harsh winters. In late November of 1927, she was loaded with a mix of general cargo, farm equipment, food and even cases of licorice at Port McNicoll, and began her last journey across Lake Superior toward Thunder Bay. The lake was already freezing over, ice coated her deck, and winter gales had begun to howl across the region with a kind of primal force that sailors both respected and feared. The Kamloops departed into worsening weather, trailing behind other ships who hoped to reach shelter before the storm reached full strength. But somewhere near the north shore of Isle Royale, amid snow squalls and plunging temperatures, she disappeared. No distress signal was ever received. No survivors ever found, and for nearly half a century, she was simply gone. Search parties were dispatched after the weather cleared, but nothing turned up. Not a single piece of wreckage washed ashore. The ship's last known position was vague at best. Crews scoured the coastline, hoping to find signs of grounding, but the Kamloops had vanished completely into the lake's depths, swallowed whole. It wasn't until the summer of 1977, 50 years after her disappearance, that divers finally located the wreck, resting 270 feet below the surface, near the northwest edge of Isle Royale. What they found stunned even the most experienced of them. The Kamloops lay on her starboard side, remarkably intact, despite the decades spent beneath one of the coldest, most unforgiving freshwater lakes on Earth. Her cargo remained undisturbed, spools of wire, crates of food and coils of rope still in place, suspended in time. The cold, oxygen-depleted water had slowed the process of decay to nearly nothing. Wooden surfaces had barely rotted. Paint was still visible in places. The ship was like a time capsule, frozen in her final moment. And then came the bodies. Most shipwrecks yield no remains, or only bone fragments after decades underwater. But the Kamloops was different. As divers explored the engine room, they came across something they weren't prepared for. The body of a man fully preserved, lying on the floor near a ladder. His face was pale and waxy, his eyes still open. He appeared to be staring upward, as if waiting for someone to find him. Because of the intense cold and unique water conditions in Lake Superior, the body hadn't decayed in the usual way. Instead, it had become a natural mummy, leathery skin pulled tight over the bones, clothes still clinging to his frame, hair intact. He became known as the Frozen Man, or more reverently, Old Whitey. Every dive team that visited the Kamloops since has reported seeing him there, still waiting in the same position, as if silently keeping watch over the ruins. Some claim his eyes follow them as they pass. Others say he seems to drift ever so slightly toward visitors, arms gently lifted by unseen currents. It is deeply unnerving, not gruesome, just uncanny, like he never left. For years rumors grew around old Whitey. Was he an engineer desperately trying to shut down the engines as the ship flooded? Was he trapped as the bulkheads collapsed around him? Or had he simply accepted his fate, curling up in a quiet corner as the lake claimed its prize? Some divers claim to have seen other bodies deeper in the wreck, hidden in the aft cabins and hallways, floating gently in the cold as if asleep. But only Whitey has remained so clearly visible, year after year, as if he chose to stay above the others. And then came the stories, the ones that diver logs don't always mention. One team surfaced visibly shaken after a deep dive, refusing to speak until they were back on the mainland. When they finally did, they claimed they'd heard sounds inside the wreck, metallic tapping, the faint creak of footsteps on steel. One diver said he'd turned a corner near the engine room and thought he saw someone pass through the corridor ahead, a figure in overalls vanishing just around the next bulkhead. But when he followed, the corridor was empty. Another diver, an experienced shipwreck explorer with over 100 dives to her name, surfaced in tears, saying she'd seen the preserved man's hand move. No video footage has ever captured these moments, only the stories. Whispered accounts traded between divers in low-lit bars, at the edge of sonar screens, or as they descend once more into the ice-black water. Today, the SS Kamloops remains one of the most visited deep wrecks in the Great Lakes, but only by technical divers with the training and gear to survive the crushing pressure and freezing cold. The lake shows no mercy to the unprepared. Above the wreck, the waters remain as restless as ever, with sudden squalls and waves that can appear in minutes. Boaters speak of electronics malfunctioning near the site, GPS signals weakening, compasses swinging without reason. Whether it's a trick of geology, magnetism, or something else, no one can quite say. But the wreck remains, silent, undisturbed, a shrine to the dead, and to something older, something that reminds us that nature does not forget. The Kamloops lies in darkness, her secrets still held in rust and silence. Her crew, especially old Whitey, have become legends beneath the surface. Some say he is a warning, others, a guardian. But all who see him agree on one thing: there is something sacred in that wreck, something you don't talk about lightly, something that feels like. The story has become a maritime ghost loop, eternally trapped in the tides of Goodwin Sands, where so many other vessels have found their end. The tale begins in February of 1748. The Lady Loverbond was a brand new three-masted schooner, polished and proud, preparing to set sail from London down the Thames, bound for Portugal. Her captain, Simon Reed, was an experienced and respected seafarer, known for his calm leadership and his almost poetic devotion to the sea. But unlike most captains of his time, Reed made a decision that many considered a terrible omen. He brought his new bride aboard with him. It was to be their honeymoon, a voyage of celebration and adventure across the cold winter waters of the English Channel. Maritime superstition, however, held that women aboard a ship brought misfortune. Sailors whispered of storms and deaths caused by female presence, a belief rooted in centuries of fear and folklore. Captain Reed ignored the warnings. He was deeply in love, unwilling to leave his bride behind. The couple boarded the Lady Loverbond in early February, with flowers adorning the ship's railings and candles flickering below deck. The crew, uneasy but loyal, prepared for departure. The wind was sharp but steady, and the ship made good time down the Thames. But as they approached the narrowing coastline near Kent, where the infamous Goodwin Sands lay in wait like teeth beneath the tide, fate, or something darker, began to stir. Among the crew was the ship's first mate, John Rivers, a man whose heart also belonged to the captain's bride. Unbeknownst to the happy couple, Rivers had harbored feelings for her long before the wedding. He had watched silent and jealous as she fell in love with Reed, and now, trapped on a vessel with them both, watching their joy, their closeness, his heart twisted into rage. On the night of February 13th, while most of the crew was below deck, Rivers seized his chance. In a fit of passion and madness, he took control of the helm, overpowering the helmsman and steering the Lady Loverbond straight toward the Goodwin Sands, a lethal sandbank known for sinking ships without mercy. The tide was high, and the shoals lay just beneath the surface. The ship plowed forward at full speed. By the time the crew realized what was happening, it was too late. The Lady Loverbond struck the sands with a deafening shudder. Her hull cracked, masts splintered, the ship broke apart in the surf, pieces scattering across the water like driftwood. No survivors. Captain Reed, his bride, and the entire crew perished beneath the waves, dragged into the sand and forgotten, or so it seemed. The first strange report came 50 years later. In 1798, a coastal vessel near Goodwin Sands reported seeing a schooner sailing full speed toward the shoals. The captain of the observing ship, thinking it was a reckless maneuver or a vessel in distress, watched in horror as the schooner collided with the sandbank. Yet there was no sound, no splintering wood, no wreckage. The ship simply vanished. Confused, they reported the incident to local authorities, who found nothing at the scene. Then in 1848, another ship passing near the area on the exact same date claimed to see the Lady Loverbond again. This time, the watchers said the ship was glowing with an unnatural light, casting a green shimmer across the waves. Again she sailed full speed into the Goodwin Sands. Again she disappeared without a trace. The phenomenon repeated in 1898, in 1948, and in 1998, several groups, some coastal watchers, others simply passers-by walking the shore, reported seeing a ghostly vessel near the shoals, lit by an eerie glow, vanishing into mist. There were no modern ships logged in the area at those times, no radar detections, just stories, accounts by witnesses who had nothing to gain, who often didn't even know the legend. Some believe it's a classic maritime haunting, the Lady Loverbond cursed to relive her final moments for eternity, playing out the doomed love triangle like a phantom echo locked in time. Others suggest a time slip, a moment when conditions align and the past bleeds into the present. More skeptical voices say it's coincidence, myth-making that grows with each generation. But those who have seen her, the glowing sails, the shape of the masts, the way she vanishes in silence, speak of something beyond storytelling, something that feels real. Divers have searched the Goodwin Sands countless times. Hundreds of wrecks lie hidden beneath the shifting currents and silty seabed, but the sands move. They erase, they bury and unbury as the years go on. No definitive remains of the Lady Loverbond have ever been found. She exists between history and myth, a ship that perhaps was real once, but now occupies a more spectral plane. The sands themselves are said to be cursed. Over 2,000 vessels are believed to have sunk there. Mariners speak of compasses spinning wildly, of voices on the wind, of fleeting shadows beneath the waves. One diver claimed he felt a hand brush his leg. When he looked down, he saw nothing, only bubbles, drifting up toward a sun he could no longer see. And so every 50 years, those who remember the legend stand along the Kentish coast, peering into the horizon on February 13th, waiting, watching, wondering if they too will see her. The bride ship, the cursed voyage, the Lady Loverbond, forever sailing toward her fate. In a world that changes so quickly, where stories are swept away by time and tide, there is something enduring in this endless repetition. A reminder that some tragedies refuse to fade, some hearts do not forget, and the sea, vast and ancient, remembers everything. Part 18. The SS Bechimo and the ghost ship that wouldn't die. There is a kind of horror that settles not in a scream, but in silence. In the vastness of the Arctic, surrounded by nothing but endless white and wind, where time itself seems to freeze, one ship became a legend, not through a single tragic event, but by refusing to vanish. For over 3 decades, the SS Bechimo was a phantom on the ice, appearing, disappearing, and drifting alone across the frozen seas of the north. Not sunken, not destroyed, just there, watching, waiting, unmanned, unclaimed, a ghost ship in the most literal sense. The SS Bechimo began her life in 1914 in Sweden. Launched under the name Ångerman 11, she was a steel-hulled cargo steamer, 230 feet long, built for the Baltic routes. Eventually acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company, the ship was renamed and assigned to trade missions along the harsh northern coasts of Canada. Her job was to ferry goods between Inuit settlements, remote outposts, and the ports of Alaska, braving ice-choked waters that most vessels would never dare enter. The Bechimo was not grand. She wasn't even particularly beautiful, but she was reliable, strong, a workhorse in a region where survival was measured not in miles, but in minutes of exposure to the cold. In the fall of 1931, while returning from a trading mission near the Canadian Arctic, the Beichimo became trapped in pack ice near Barrow, Alaska. It wasn't the first time. Arctic ships often faced temporary freeze-ins, waiting for winds to shift or ice to loosen. The crew abandoned ship briefly to wait it out, returning days later to find her still lodged in place. Supplies were brought in by sled, makeshift shelters were built. The cold was punishing, the sun disappearing earlier each day as winter approached. Still, the ship seemed intact. Then a storm struck. When it cleared, the Beichimo was gone. The crew assumed she had broken free and sunk, but days later she was spotted drifting aimlessly miles from the original site, encased in her own halo of ice. Still afloat, still whole, the crew boarded her again, salvaging cargo and debating their next move. A second storm was forecasted, and the Hudson's Bay Company, fearing for the crew's lives, ordered them to abandon the vessel. They did, leaving her behind for good. But the Beichimo refused to die. In the months and years that followed, the ship was seen again and again by fishermen, explorers, whalers, and Inuit nomads, always adrift, sometimes trapped in ice, other times floating freely, occasionally grounded on a sandbar, only to disappear once more. Her engine never ran, her lights never flickered, no crew ever returned. She simply roamed. In 1933, an Inuit hunting party stumbled upon her while crossing frozen terrain. They boarded the ghost ship out of curiosity, finding her eerily preserved frost clinging to her interior walls, the cargo hold empty, maps still pinned to the walls. It was as though time had paused. One man claimed he heard a door creak shut on its own, though there was no wind. Another found a boot with no footprints nearby. They left quickly. In 1939, a group of explorers attempted to claim her but were driven off by worsening ice conditions. In 1962, she was spotted again, drifting 300 miles west of her last known location. No one boarded her this time. She was beginning to rust, her hull battered, but she remained afloat, defiant against decay. Her name, though faded, could still be read across her side: Beichimo. Over time, sightings became rarer. Some said she had finally sunk. Others believed she had simply wandered farther into the north, where no one would ever find her. Then in 1969, 38 years after she was first abandoned, a survey team flying over the Beaufort Sea claimed they saw her once again wedged in ice, solitary and still. They circled back for another look, but she was gone. You know what makes the Beichimo so unnerving is not just her longevity, it's the sheer refusal to follow the script. Ships that are abandoned don't last long, especially not in Arctic conditions. Ice crushes steel, winds batter hulls, the cold eats away at everything, and yet she endured. It's as though she had become something else entirely, not just a ship, but a relic imbued with its own will, a presence that did not want to rest. Over the years, stories have clung to her like frost, whispers of strange lights on her deck at night, of movement seen through portholes. One tale, unverifiable but persistent, tells of a man who attempted to board the Beichimo in the 1950s and was never seen again. His last message by radio was a simple line: "I hear something below." The signal cut, and he vanished. Others dismissed it as nonsense, but no one ever found his body. To this day, the final fate of the Beichimo remains unknown. No wreck has been confirmed, no debris field identified. She may have finally surrendered to the sea, resting beneath the ice in some unmarked grave. Or she may still be adrift, moving slowly through the endless white, waiting for someone else to find her. There's something deeply unsettling about a ship that outlives every expectation. A machine left alone in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, continuing its voyage long after it should have ended. Not carrying cargo, not guided by hand, just drifting, in watching, remembering. The SS Beichimo doesn't fit cleanly into our categories of ghost story or historical anomaly. She is both, and something more. A symbol of how the sea never fully lets go. A floating paradox, a whisper in the ice, and perhaps if you're ever traveling far enough north, past the lights and the maps, you might spot her silhouette in the mist, sailing into memory, untethered and eternal. It looks like there's been a technical issue preventing responses from being displayed. Let me regenerate. Part 19 of the script for you now.
Part 19. The Phantom of the Arctic Ghost Ship. In the frozen reaches of the Arctic Circle, where the horizon stretches into an endless white void and the winds whisper like lost voices, there exists a maritime mystery as chilling as the waters themselves. The sea ice groans under the shifting weight of winter, and for centuries, ships that dared venture too far north sometimes vanished, their fate sealed in the deep and unrelenting cold. Among these, one story has haunted generations of polar explorers, whispered in hushed tones around ship lanterns during long Arctic nights. It is the tale of a ship known simply as the Arctic Phantom, a vessel reportedly sighted drifting silently across icy straits, crewless, engine dead, lights flickering through the haze of snowfall, a ship without life, yet not entirely abandoned. The first modern encounter came in 1931, during an expedition led by Norwegian polar explorer Knut Jorgensen. His team had been mapping remote ice floes between Greenland and Canada when they spotted a dark hull looming in the fog. At first, they believed it to be another expedition vessel, or perhaps a whaling ship, marooned and in need of assistance. But as they drew near, the atmosphere shifted. The fog thickened unnaturally, their instruments began to fail, and an unshakable cold crept through the metal of their own ship. The vessel they found was a small cargo steamer, about 70 meters long, with hull markings erased by time and frost. Its windows were intact, its mast still bore torn signal flags, but no one came to greet them. No distress flares, no radio contact. The ship was silent. Jorgensen and 3 crewmen boarded the derelict cautiously, weapons in hand. What they found inside has remained one of the most perplexing puzzles in polar history. The ship's interior was in remarkable condition. Tables were set with plates, some half filled with frozen food. Beds were unmade, personal belongings were scattered, and coats hung by the door as though the crew had simply stepped out for a moment. In the galley, a pot still sat on the stove, frozen solid. The engines too were in operable shape, but cold and quiet. No signs of struggle, no water damage, no soot from a fire, no animal intrusion. It was as if life had paused in an instant, and yet it felt watched. Jorgensen wrote later in his logbook that the air aboard felt unnaturally charged, as if a presence was coiled invisibly around each corner. His men reported whispers in the dark, soft knocks from deep below the decks, and even the sound of heavy boots crossing the floor above them, though no one else was aboard. The most unnerving discovery came when they reached the bridge. A single crew log, written in English, sat on the control panel. The final entry read simply, "He walks now between the rooms, cold follows him." That was it. No signature, no prior logs, just one final message, as though all that had come before had been removed, or perhaps had never existed. They scoured the vessel for identifying marks, but even the nameplate had been ripped clean from the bow. Jorgensen's men were shaken, and after only 20 minutes aboard, they returned to their own ship. But as they departed, the fog that had obscured the vessel thickened further, swallowing it whole. Within moments, it had vanished from sight and from radar. The story was dismissed by skeptics for years, attributed to hypothermia-induced hallucination or shared panic. But then came the second sighting. In 1959, a Canadian icebreaker operating near Baffin Bay reported nearly the same experience. An unmarked vessel adrift in the fog, appearing out of nowhere, completely intact but void of crew. Again, the boarding team found a preserved ship interior, complete with personal effects, warm jackets, and food that seemed to have been prepared just before abandonment. The bridge log had a final line eerily similar to the one Jorgensen had reported, written in shaky handwriting. "He is below again. The cold is no longer outside." The men left the ship immediately, unnerved and unable to explain the sensations they described later as being watched by something that knew we did not belong. Over the years there have been scattered reports, 1967, 1983, 1998, and most recently, 2015, from vessels traveling far into northern shipping lanes that claim to have seen the phantom ship. Each report is nearly identical. It appears suddenly in dense fog, drifts silently, no SOS, no contact, and each time boarding attempts are either aborted or led to chillingly similar interiors, perfectly preserved, eerily abandoned, no bodies, no ice damage, and always the same overwhelming sense that something else is aboard. A few maritime researchers have speculated that the ship may be a unique case of cold preservation, a derelict carried by rare ocean currents,
and trapped in the Arctic's gyres for decades. But this theory fails to explain the impossibly well-maintained condition of the vessel. No barnacles, no rust corrosion, no signs of decay. Others believe it is the ghost of a real vessel lost in a pre-25th century expedition, perhaps from one of the failed Franklin Arctic missions. A ship caught in the ice, the crew perished by starvation or madness, and their ship cursed to drift until time forgets its origin. But among Inuit communities in the Arctic regions, there are far older stories. Elders speak of a vessel that has existed for generations, seen by hunters and travelers long before Europeans ever sailed those waters. A ship with black sails and no name, drifting without destination, carrying not just the souls of lost men, but something older, an entity bound to the ice itself. One that does not die, one that does not leave, one that does not forgive those who trespass too far north. Whether a cautionary tale born from the dangers of polar exploration, or a true supernatural anomaly lost in the vast white expanse, the Arctic Phantom remains one of the sea's most chilling stories. A ship that defies the laws of time, untouched by decay, vanishing into fog, and leaving behind only fear, whispers, and the chilling echo of footsteps across an empty deck. Part 20. The lighthouse wreck and the keeper who never left off the rocky coast of Cornwall, where the Atlantic hammers the cliffs with eternal fury. There lies a wreck no fisherman dares draw too near. Beneath the waves, twisted steel and shattered beams rest in silence, the remains of a merchant ship called the Althea. She was lost in the winter of 1913, dashed against the shallows during a vicious storm that extinguished every lighthouse in the region, save one. And it is from that lone beacon, standing still on the edge of a jagged promontory, that the true mystery begins. The Althea was not a vessel of glamour or war. She was a simple cargo steamer, modest in size, carrying textiles, coal and barrels of whiskey from Glasgow to Lisbon. Her crew was seasoned, her captain known for caution and discipline. But the weather that rose that night was no ordinary squall. Witnesses from the village of Penwith, huddled in their homes as wind screamed through the chimneys and ocean spray lashed the fields, later claimed it was as though the storm had a will of its own, rising with uncanny speed, shifting the waves against all known currents. Mariners swore it moved with intelligence, forcing ships toward the cliffs instead of away from them. The Althea was caught in that current. Her last SOS was received at 11:42 p.m., a panicked Morse code transmission. Lights dead, sea wrong, turning by itself. After that silence. The next morning, debris washed up along the coast, casks shattered, lifeboats torn asunder. No bodies, only twisted remnants, as though the sea had claimed its debt and left no further trace. But the lighthouse at Godwin's Watch, the ancient granite tower that stood at the edge of the cliffs, had remained lit. Its beam, stubborn and steady, was seen by villagers all night, cutting through the mist like a knife, and yet, no one had lit it. Godwin's Watch had been decommissioned years before, replaced by newer coastal beacons powered by electricity. The last keeper, a man named Elias Marsh, had retired under strange circumstances. Some said he spoke to the sea, others said he had lost his mind after his wife drowned in a sailing accident just below the cliffs. He had been found wandering the rocks, whispering to the wind, refusing to leave the tower. Only after he was physically removed did the lighthouse go dark, its doors chained, its stairs left to dust and time. But on the night the Althea went down, the beam returned. The Coast Guard, baffled, climbed the tower at first light. They expected squatters, vandals, perhaps a rogue sailor using the beacon for shelter. What they found chilled even the most hardened among them. The chains had not been cut, they were rusted clean through. Inside, the tower was pristine. Fresh logs burned in the stove. The windows were scrubbed of years of grime. And most unsettling of all, the lens room at the top, where the great light rotated, had been meticulously maintained. The mechanism spun as if oiled yesterday, despite no known upkeep for over half a decade. And then there was the logbook. A new entry had been added, dated that very night, written in Elias Marsh's unmistakable hand. Storm coming in. Something rides the tide tonight. The light must not go out. I will keep it. For her. For them. The entry was signed with his full name and a small drawing of a sailing boat, identical to the one his wife had drowned in. Searches were conducted. Elias Marsh was long dead, buried in a churchyard just inland. His grave was undisturbed. His family had moved away years before. No fingerprints were found in the tower, no signs of entry. Yet the logbook, The fire, the functioning light, all were real. And to this day, when storms gather along the Cornish coast, fishermen speak of seeing the Godwin's watch flicker to life once more. Some say the Althea's crew are still down there, restless and lost, circling the wreck beneath the cliffs, that they follow the light when it appears, hoping it will lead them home. Others believe Elias Marsh never truly left, that his grief fused with the stone of the tower, and when the sea rises with rage, he returns to keep watch, not just for ships, but for the spirit of his beloved forever bound to the waves. Divers who attempt to explore the wreck report odd phenomena. Compass needles spin erratically, flashlights dim. Recorded footage often fails to capture the sight entirely, showing only rippling silt and indistinct shadows. A few have heard what sounds like a distant foghorn underwater, long and low, followed by muffled voices just outside their helmet glass. None have ever retrieved artifacts. A research team in 2004 attempted to raise a piece of the Althea's hull, but the cables snapped 3 separate times, each time just as the winch neared the surface. The operation was abandoned, and yet the wreck remains, just visible from the cliffs on a clear day, a scar beneath the waves. And always that feeling, that sense of being watched from the tower above, even when its windows are black. The villagers no longer question it. Some leave lanterns on their porches during storms. Others hum a song, a tune said to have been Elias's wife's favorite, a lullaby to the sea, a peace offering. The Godwin's watch stands still, worn by time, defying the wind. And every few winters, when lightning splits the sky and the ocean claws at the earth, the light returns once more, a single beam sweeping the horizon, calling out through the darkness, a keeper at his post, a wreck that never let go. A haunting that feels less like terror and more like devotion, quiet, tragic, eternal.
Part 21. The ghost divers of the SS Inkerman south of Newfoundland's icy waters. Beyond the well-charted shipping lanes lies a stretch of sea mariners once called the Silent Channel. It earned that name not for peace, but for the strange absence of echoes. Sonar pings vanish in this zone. No seabed returns. No rock walls bounce signals back. Only silence. That silence is where the SS Inkerman was last seen, and where, according to the few who claim to have ventured near, it may still be heard. The Inkerman was a Canadian cargo steamer built during World War I, one of a trio of sister ships constructed hastily to support Allied efforts. It launched in 1918 under quiet fanfare, heavily loaded with railway equipment, and bound for France. She sailed from Quebec into heavy November seas, and disappeared without a single distress signal. Neither debris nor survivors were found. For decades, she was listed as one of many wartime maritime losses, presumed to have struck ice and gone under quickly. But in 1957, a Soviet trawler operating in disputed waters reported something strange. Their nets had snagged something heavy and metallic. When they tried to lift it, the object fell away, but not before a diver was sent down to inspect. That diver returned shaken, refusing to describe what he'd seen, save for one phrase repeated again and again in Russian: "It is waiting." Later, independent dive teams, drawn by the mystery, began unofficial explorations in the region. These weren't military operations or funded expeditions, just thrill seekers, wreck divers, and hobbyists drawn to ghost stories. One such diver was Marcus Elroy, a retired naval engineer with over 3 decades of underwater exploration. In a recorded interview in the early 1980s, his voice trembles as he recalls descending into the dark, where the sea seemed to thicken around him, cold in ways he'd never felt before. Lights flickered. The current grew stronger near the bottom, pushing him off course. But then he saw it. He described a long steel hull embedded halfway into the silt, tilted as if arrested mid-fall, portholes intact. No sign of impact or rupture. It was as though the ship had simply been placed there, cradled by the sea. But stranger than the condition of the vessel was the presence of movement inside. He claimed he saw shadows crossing the inside of the bridge. Not fish, not kelp. Shadows shaped like men, walking, pausing, turning, as though still operating the ship. Elroy swam closer, shining his torch through the thick glass. Inside he saw a figure, a man in a World War I Terra naval uniform, standing at the helm. The man slowly turned his head to face him. There was no flesh, just bone and a jaw locked open in a silent scream. Yet the body stood upright, gripping the wheel with skeletal hands. As Elroy recoiled,
The beam of his torch caught another detail along the inner walls, writing, scratched into the metal with bare hands or tools, over and over again. In French, in English, in something else. One phrase stood out, repeated in hundreds of markings. "We dive for air." Elroy surfaced in a panic, abandoning his line. His companion on the boat above recalled that he refused to speak for days afterward, and when he did, he begged them never to return to that site. He later destroyed the footage from his helmet cam, claiming that they had followed him back, and that sounds came from his walls at night. He died 2 years later, found drowned in his own bathtub, no signs of struggle. The tub was filled with salt water. After Elroy's story gained minor notoriety, others came forward with whispered tales. Fishermen reported seeing bubbles rising in perfectly still waters. Navy patrols recorded radio interference that matched Morse code long out of use. And then there were the lights, soft flickering blue-green glows beneath the waves that seemed to drift just out of reach. When approached, they vanished. When ignored, they returned the next night, closer to shore. One chilling detail came from a French diver named Sabine Duval, who led a clandestine expedition in 1992. Her team reached what they believed was the Inkerman. They reported seeing not one wreck but two overlapping in the same space, as though time had fractured, layering multiple realities. Her notes described the sensation of hearing breathing, not through her helmet, but in her mind, rhythmic, panicked, like a crew drowning forever, just behind my eyes. She also mentions a sonar anomaly, an impossible echo that when played back, formed a crude melody. A sea shanty known to be sung by Canadian naval crews during World War I. What happened to the Inkerman remains unsolved. The prevailing theory suggests a combination of heavy ice, poor weather, and overloaded cargo sank her without a trace. But the stories, the divers, the radio signals, the shadows refused to sync with her. Some believe the ship entered a kind of liminal space, a fold in the ocean where time halts and souls repeat their last desperate moments. Others insist it is a curse, a consequence of war and secrecy, that doomed her to remain hidden and restless. And then there's the chilling theory from Sabine's last transmission, that the Inkerman was never truly a ship at all, but a vessel in a different sense. Something built to hold, to trap, to contain, and that what lies within her hull is not human anymore. Her final message, sent before her radio went silent: "If you find it, do not open the hatch." The coordinates she broadcast were scrambled. To this day, no one has decoded them, and perhaps no one should. Part 22, the siren's toll of the Valencia off the rugged west coast of Vancouver Island. A stretch of sea known as the Graveyard of the Pacific has claimed countless ships. Its fog-heavy winds, jagged reefs, and deceptive currents are notorious among mariners. But one shipwreck among the many stands apart, haunted not just by memory but by unshakable legends. The SS Valencia, a passenger steamer bound from San Francisco to Seattle, met its fate in 1906, and with it, left behind echoes no lighthouse has ever been able to silence. The Valencia was not a glamorous vessel. It was old, built for calmer waters, and known among sailors to be sluggish, prone to listing. Yet it carried over 170 passengers, men, women, and many children, when it departed on a cold January day. Weather was already turning as they approached Cape Beale, where thick fog and misread charts caused the ship to veer dangerously close to land. Then as night fell, a brutal storm rose from the horizon, pounding waves into the hull with fists of water. At around midnight, the Valencia struck a reef. Panic spread almost instantly. Lifeboats were lowered in chaos. Several overturned either from poorly secured rigging or the violent surf. One slammed into the side of the ship and cracked in half. Another was torn away before anyone could board. The crew tried to maintain order, but the darkness, the freezing water, and the cries of children drowned out any command. By morning, the ship was lodged onto a ledge, breaking apart slowly as the ocean claimed it piece by piece. Rescue attempts were hindered by the treacherous shoreline. Ships that approached were turned back by the surf, or blinded by fog. But from those distant decks, sailors saw something harrowing. Passengers still clinging to the broken hulk, exposed to wind and water. Some had tied themselves to the rigging, hoping to be spotted. Others had carved pleas into the deck with knives and coins. Onlookers could do nothing but watch as, one by one, the bodies dropped into the sea. By the time rescuers reached the wreck days later, the Valencia was gone. Only fragments remained on the rocks. Of the over 170 aboard, fewer than 40 survived. None of the women or children made it. That fact alone stained the disaster with a deeper grief. But it was what followed that marked the Valencia in the language of curses and ghost stories. In the years after the wreck, fishermen and passing ships began to report strange occurrences. In calm weather, they heard panicked voices echoing over the waves, women screaming, children sobbing, men shouting orders that were carried away by the wind. Some captains logged hearing the ringing of a bell, even though the Valencia had no bell. Others claimed to see a ghostly ship drifting just beneath the surface, its masts broken, its hull glowing faintly like fireflies in a jar. They called it the Phantom Valencia. In 1910, a group of loggers reported a sighting so vivid it was entered into the official Coast Guard records. They swore they saw lifeboat number 5 of the Valencia, manned by skeletal figures, drifting silently down the coast before vanishing in a sudden burst of fog. Weeks later, that very lifeboat washed up on shore in pristine condition, despite being missing for 4 years. Inside were 6 life vests arranged in a circle, as though still being worn. That same year, a lighthouse keeper at Pashana Point claimed to see figures on the rocks near the wreck site. He thought them stranded hikers and signaled, but no reply came. When he went to investigate, the beach was empty, save for bare footprints in the wet sand that led into the sea, not out of it. He left the post the following season, citing sleeplessness and persistent voices. As the decades rolled on, reports dwindled, but never stopped. In 1933, a tugboat captain radioed that he saw a flare from the Valencia's last known coordinates. He approached and found nothing, but his radar caught a signal moving beneath him, slow, steady, shaped like a hull. He dropped a sonar buoy. When analyzed later, the pattern it recorded resembled human heartbeat rhythms, multiplied by dozens. Even modern-day divers who explore the graveyard of the Pacific speak of the Valencia in hushed tones. Some claim to have seen what looks like the outline of a ship just beneath the kelp beds, clear one moment, gone the next. Others describe finding shoes, coins, or children's toys nestled in the reef, far too well preserved to have spent over a century in salt water. One diver swore he heard singing, not in his headset, but through the water itself. A lullaby, old and soft, in a language he didn't recognize. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as exaggerations, the result of trauma, legends woven too tightly into local memory. But even they cannot explain one final chilling detail. In 1980, a scuba team exploring near the Valencia's supposed resting place found a pocket watch wedged into a crevice. It was rusted, broken, but still bore an inscription: "To Eleanor. Always come home." No record exists of who Eleanor was, but when the watch was shown to a local historian, he went pale. That very phrase had been scrawled in charcoal on a Valencia lifeboat that washed ashore in 1906. Whatever truly happened on that reef in 1906, the Valencia's story did not end there. It continued, through whispers, visions, and spectral echoes carried on wind and tide. The sea took the passengers, but it never quite let them go. And to this day, when the fog creeps in and the surf begins to roar, some say the ship returns, not seeking rescue, but reliving its final night, again and again beneath the waves.
Part 23. The Forgotten Crew of the Beishimo. In the far reaches of the Arctic Circle, where daylight fades into endless night and silence drapes the ice like a shroud, there is a legend of a ghost ship that refuses to rest. Not because of some ancient curse, but because no one ever came to claim her. The SS Beishimo was a steel-hulled cargo steamer built in 1914, originally operated by a German company, and later seized by the British as war reparations after World War I. She was put into service by the Hudson's Bay Company, carrying fur and supplies to remote settlements along the icy waters of northern Canada. But her voyages were never routine, and one day, the Beishimo simply stayed behind. It was October of 1931, the tail end of the Arctic shipping season. The Beishimo, having made her rounds delivering and collecting goods from Inuit communities and fur traders, was headed back to Vancouver. But a sudden ferocious blizzard rolled down from the northwest, sealing the ship in pack ice off the coast of Barrow, Alaska. The crew knew what that meant. Winter had come early,
and the Beishimo was trapped. With no clear path forward, they had only two choices: wait for a thaw or abandon the vessel. The company arranged for an emergency shelter to be built on shore, just a mile away. The crew took refuge in the structure, visiting the ship daily to check its condition. But one morning, after another fierce snowstorm, the Beishimo was gone, vanished from the ice like a breath in the wind. The crew assumed she had sunk, taken under by shifting flows. Grief and confusion followed, until a hunter reported seeing the ship intact, drifting 45 miles south. The crew raced to find her, and was stunned to see she had survived the storm. But the hull had been warped. The ice had damaged the vessel enough that the Hudson's Bay Company deemed it too risky to salvage. So they left her. In a decision that continues to haunt maritime historians, the crew retrieved what valuables they could and abandoned the Beishimo to the ice, expecting she'd break apart soon. But the Beishimo had other plans. Over the next few years, she was sighted again and again, drifting slowly through the Arctic waters. Inuit hunters would spot her near the horizon. Explorers would come across her frozen in sea ice, eerily intact. In 1933, a group of Alaskan traders boarded her and found everything inside undisturbed: logbooks, furniture, crates of fur, even a kettle still resting on a rusted iron stove. In 1939, a dog sled team traveling along the coast stumbled upon the ship again, now wedged between jagged ice ridges. The team leader, fearing the ship might break free, ordered his men not to board, but one man did. He found the captain's quarters still furnished, with faded maps pinned to the walls and a broken compass lying on the floor. When he returned to the team, his hands were shaking. He said he had heard voices, low murmuring, speaking in English and something else he couldn't recognize. He didn't go back inside. The Beishimo became a legend, her sightings spanning decades. She was reported again in 1941-1949, and as late as 1962, each time more battered but never broken. No one ever saw her sink. No one ever found a final resting place. The Arctic seemed to claim her as its own, a relic moving through time like a ghost walking the same halls each night. Those who saw her said the ship looked less like a derelict and more like a memory. Windows blackened with frost, decks groaning with cold, her silhouette rising like a cathedral of rust from the white silence. Some began to whisper that the Beishimo was cursed, that leaving her behind without a proper burial had angered the spirits of the north. Others believed the crew's souls were still aboard, unable to complete their final journey. The Inuit had their own stories too. They said the ship belonged to the ice now, and those who chased her would never return. Indeed, at least 2 salvage attempts were launched, both of which ended in failure. One team lost their equipment in a freak storm. Another found the ship but reported being overcome with nausea and disorientation after setting foot on board, as though the air itself rejected them. Over time, the Beishimo sightings became fewer, but the fascination never faded. In 2006, the Alaskan government funded a search expedition using satellite imagery and sonar mapping. They found nothing, no wreck, no trace. It was as if the sea had finally decided to draw the curtains on the old ship, or perhaps she had drifted so far north that no human eyes would see her again. Still, every few years a new rumor surfaces. Someone sees a shape on the horizon, or hears metal groaning in the distance, or finds an old crate washed ashore bearing the Hudson's Bay Company logo and a year etched in fading ink, 1931. There is something profoundly unsettling about a ship that simply refuses to die. The Beishimo didn't explode, didn't burn, didn't crash against the rocks. She just kept drifting, just beyond reach, like a ghost that isn't malevolent, but isn't at peace either. Her story is one of abandonment, endurance, and haunting stillness. In the vast silence of the Arctic, where even the wind forgets to howl, the Beishimo drifts on, carrying with her not just the relics of a lost age, but the echoes of men who never truly left. And perhaps, if you listen closely on a calm night, you might hear the soft clang of her anchor chain, rusted but unbroken, calling through the fog. Part 24. The descent of the SS Kamloops. The Great Lakes, often mistaken for docile inland seas, have a way of reminding sailors that they are anything but. Towering waves, sudden squalls, and icy black depths have claimed more ships than can be counted, and among them lies a vessel whose final moments are shrouded in mystery, silence, and a chilling tale of preservation unlike any other. The SS Kamloops, a Canadian freighter built in 1924, was one such casualty, a steel ghost resting beneath Lake Superior, colder and darker than any ocean floor. The Kamloops was a package freighter, designed to deliver goods to remote ports unreachable by rail. In December of 1927, she embarked on a routine supply run from Hamilton, Ontario, toward the remote northern towns along Superior's rugged shorelines. Her route took her past the Apostle Islands, then northeast along the Canadian side. Laden with tar paper, food, clothing, piping, and farming equipment, she was built for speed and resilience. But neither speed nor resilience could protect her from what came next. On December 6th, a storm gathered over the lake, a brutal Arctic front with 60-mile-per-hour winds and ice forming so fast it glued lifeboats to their mounts. Most ships raced for shelter, but the Kamloops pressed on. Her last known sighting was near Isle Royale, fighting the gale, pushing into darkness. Then she vanished. No distress signal, no debris, no bodies. Only a heavy stillness over Lake Superior's North Channel, as if she had been swallowed whole. Search parties combed the shores for weeks. In the spring thaw, a few articles from the ship washed ashore, a crate of honey, a few bolts of fabric, and one lifeboat, empty. But the Kamloops herself remained missing for over 50 years. The lake kept her secret, until 1977, when a group of recreational divers stumbled upon a silhouette 260 feet beneath the surface, just off 12 o'clock point. She was upright, intact, resting as if she'd simply parked herself on the lake bed. Her cargo holds were still sealed, her wheelhouse tilted slightly with time. But what shocked the divers most was not the ship's preservation. It was the body. Inside the engine room, lying flat against the floor, was the form of a man, his clothes perfectly preserved. His face, waxy and pale. He floated slightly, tethered by a length of pipe, gently bobbing as if in thought. Divers called him Grandpa. He was later confirmed to be one of the Kamloops' crew, preserved by the cold, oxygen-starved water. No predators, no decay, just a human being, still as he was when the ship went down, sealed in silence. The Kamloops had not just vanished, she had become a time capsule, but the body wasn't the only thing left behind. In the captain's quarters, divers found unopened letters, personal journals, dinnerware still neatly placed on a side table. The ship was so well preserved that algae had yet to coat her entirely. Her name could still be read along the bow, her portholes still held glass. It was as if the Kamloops had been caught mid-breath, locked in the moment before disaster. And despite extensive study, no one has conclusively determined what caused her to sink. Some believe she was overloaded, her cargo weighing her down too far into the waterline. Others speculate she hit a rogue wave or sheet of ice, splitting a seam and flooding the hull. But there was no sign of catastrophic damage. Her hull showed no gashes, no evidence of fire, grounding, or explosion. She had simply gone down quietly, almost deliberately. The lake took her, and cradled her gently in its freezing dark for half a century before allowing her to be seen again. Lake Superior is unlike any other body of water on Earth. Its temperatures rarely rise above freezing at its deepest points. There are places where no sunlight reaches, even in midsummer. These factors combine to preserve wrecks in uncanny detail. But the Kamloops feels different, more intimate. The preserved body inside her is more than a grim curiosity. It is a reminder that this ship was not just a machine, but a moving home to people, families, dreams. A reminder that death, when it comes in water this cold, doesn't shout, it whispers. The Kamloops has drawn hundreds of divers since her rediscovery, but many speak of a strange atmosphere down there, a sense of time bending, a feeling of being watched. Some divers refuse to go near the engine room, not out of fear, but out of respect. Grandpa remains there unmoved. His presence has never been disturbed. Scientists agree that removing the body would likely accelerate decomposition, so he is left alone to keep watch, to linger in the quiet machinery of his ship. In 2003, a second body was discovered, partially buried under collapsed metal deeper in the hold. Identification was impossible, but it reminded everyone that the Kamloops tragedy was not just about lost cargo, it was about lost lives, families who never got closure. The ship is now a protected site under Canadian maritime law, and no part of her may be removed. She exists now not only as a historical relic, but as a mausoleum, a sacred echo of one frozen night in 1927. There is something deeply haunting about a ship that rests in such perfect quietude, untouched by time. Not shredded, not shattered, simply waiting for the world above to remember. And in that depth, where pressure silences everything and even light surrenders, the Kamloops endures. Her story floats just beneath the surface of memory, like breath under ice, reminding us that sometimes the dead do not vanish. They wait, they watch, and in the endless dark, they keep drifting with us.
Part 25. The Phantom of the SS Orang Medan. The sea has long whispered tales of ghost ships, vessels found adrift with no living soul aboard, their decks eerily silent, cabins frozen in time. But among all these legends, few are as deeply unsettling and as persistently unexplained as the story of the SS Orang Medan, a ship whose crew died in inexplicable agony, their faces contorted in terror, with no wounds, no warning, and no survivor left to speak of what happened. It is a story pieced together from fragments, warnings transmitted over weak radios, and the silent testimony of a drifting tomb on calm waters. The earliest account of the Orang Medan dates back to 1947, in the Straits of Malacca, a busy shipping route between Sumatra and Malaysia. Several merchant ships reported receiving a distress signal from a nearby vessel, its source initially unclear due to static interference. But then the messages grew clearer and more haunting. The first message came in disjointed bursts. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. Then after a pause, one final transmission, I die, and then static, silence. No one responded from the ship again. The coordinates were traced, and a nearby American merchant vessel, the Silver Star, changed course and approached the location. What they found was not a storm-tossed wreck or battle-damaged hull. The Orang Medan appeared intact, her steel hull undamaged, floating silently in the sunlit sea. But as the crew of the Silver Star boarded, a thick sense of dread fell over them. There were no survivors, and worse, what they saw could not be forgotten. The crew of the Orang Medan were indeed dead, all of them, scattered across the decks, in the bridge, in the engine room, and in the radio cabin. Every single one frozen in positions of pure panic, arms raised as if to defend against something invisible, mouths agape, eyes wide open. Some looked like they had been screaming, others were curled in corners, their fingers clawed into the metal floors, yet none bore any sign of injury. No blood, no bruises, no signs of violence or struggle. Even the ship's dog had perished, teeth bared, as if snarling at something unseen in its final breath. The scene grew stranger as the boarding party descended into the lower decks. In the boiler room, temperatures were reported to be almost unbearable despite the cool conditions outside. Yet the bodies were cold, freezing in fact, cold as if they'd been dead for days, though the message had come only hours before. One sailor described the sensation below deck as entering death itself. Compasses failed, watches stopped. The men of the Silver Star, hardened seafarers all, could not stay long. They decided to tow the Orang Medan to port for investigation. But before the operation could begin, smoke began to pour from the ship's lower hold. The crew of the Silver Star barely had time to cut the lines and retreat before the Orang Medan exploded. A violent, fiery blast tore through the hull, breaking it apart and sending it to the depths. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever evidence might have offered answers, was consumed in the fire and claimed by the sea. The ship sank rapidly, leaving behind nothing but the waves and a silence so deep it felt almost rehearsed. What could cause an entire crew to die in such a horrific, unnatural manner? Theories have swirled for decades, each more unsettling than the last. Some suggest a leak of toxic gas, perhaps from improperly stored chemical weapons, filling the ship and suffocating the crew in minutes, causing hallucinations and terror before death. But why then the cold bodies? Why the instantaneous horror etched into their faces? Others propose carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning boiler system, though this too fails to explain the instantaneous nature of the deaths or the explosion. A more chilling theory involves the possibility that the ship was carrying a dangerous secret cargo. Rumors have circulated about experimental nerve agents or volatile materials like potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin being smuggled illegally. If mixed improperly, Such substances could release lethal gases or detonate without warning. Some whisper that the ship never appeared on official logs because it was part of a covert operation, and that the true nature of its cargo, biological or otherwise, was meant to remain hidden forever. There are even stranger ideas that the Orang Medan encountered something paranormal, an unknown force or entity that caused mass hysteria or psychological breakdown, followed by death. That it sailed through a time rift or energy pocket that triggered some kind of dimensional disruption. Some researchers tie it to UFO sightings reported in the region during the 1940s, claiming the crew may have encountered something that defies all explanation. But these remain firmly in the realm of the speculative. What gives the Orang Medan legend its haunting power is not only the horrific scene found aboard, but the eerie final transmission. "I die." A message not about the ship, not about danger or rescue, just the final words of a man alone in a room, as something unseen took him. A whisper across time that something impossible happened that day. Some skeptics have argued the story is entirely apocryphal, a maritime myth stitched together from bits of sea lore and sailors' gossip. But over the years, multiple independent sources have claimed to have seen references to the Orang Medan in maritime logs, obscure radio transcripts and personal journals. While no definitive record of the ship's construction exists, this is not unusual for covert or black market operations during post-war years. And even if the Orang Medan never existed, even if her final voyage was only imagined, it does not erase the fear she inspires. Because something about the tale feels deeply plausible. A ship adrift, silent, a crew all dead with faces frozen in terror, a message that ends in the final breath of a dying man, and then obliteration, a clean removal from history, the perfect vanishing act. To this day, divers in the Strait of Malacca have searched for wreckage of the Orang Medan. None has ever been found, but sometimes on calm nights, when the moon hangs low and the sea reflects its light like silver glass, sailors report hearing a faint garbled message over old radios, a whisper in broken Morse, a voice saying, "All dead," then static, then nothing. Part 26. The ghost of the SS Valencia. The rugged western coast of Vancouver Island is a place shaped by violence, geological, oceanic, and emotional. Here towering waves slam against black cliffs, winds howl through narrow inlets, and the water hides endless tales of loss. Among them, one shipwreck looms larger than most, not because of the number of lives lost, though it was tragic, not because of the severity of the storm, though it was brutal, but because of what came after, because of what was seen, because of what was heard. The story of the SS Valencia is not just a disaster, it is a haunting that refuses to let go. In January of 1906, the SS Valencia left San Francisco bound for Seattle. She was not a new ship, built in 1882. She had spent most of her life on the East Coast before being reassigned to the West. She was not designed for the harsh open waters of the Pacific Northwest, yet she was pressed into service due to high passenger demand. On this voyage, she carried nearly 130 people, men, women, children, and crew. Most were immigrants, workers, and their families starting new lives in the North. What awaited them was not a new life, but a terrifying death that would echo for over a century. After sailing smoothly for the first day, the Valencia ran into rough seas near Cape Mendocino. Visibility dropped, currents shifted. The captain, Oscar Johnson, attempted to navigate by dead reckoning, but something went wrong, terribly wrong. Just after midnight on January 22nd, the ship veered too close to the coast. The hull struck a reef, tearing a gash that filled the lower compartments in minutes. Panic spread. In the dark, with waves crashing over the deck and the ship listing hard, lifeboats were lowered, but most were destroyed immediately upon hitting the water or were swept away into darkness. Only a few managed to get free. The Valencia was trapped on a reef just 50 meters from the rocky cliffs of the shore, but it may as well have been miles. The cliffs were sheer, jagged, and unreachable. The storm made any rescue attempt from the sea nearly impossible. Over the next 36 hours, passengers huddled on the deck, clinging to each other and to hope. The cold was merciless, the waves relentless. One by one, people were swept overboard or jumped in desperation. A few managed to scramble onto rocks below the cliffs, but most were claimed by the ocean. When word of the disaster reached the mainland, rescue ships were dispatched, but the storm kept them at bay. From the cliffs above, local indigenous people watched,
helpless, unable to reach the survivors. They saw women and children huddling beneath makeshift blankets, waving frantically as the sea rose higher. But there was nothing anyone could do. When the sea finally calmed enough for the rescue ships to approach, it was too late. The Valencia was gone. Only one lifeboat was ever found with survivors. In total, over 110 lives were lost. That alone would make the Valencia tragedy unforgettable. But the story does not end there. In the weeks and months that followed, people began reporting strange sightings along the coast. Sailors on passing ships described seeing a vessel, broken, rusted, with tattered sails floating aimlessly near the cliffs. When approached, it would vanish. Locals claimed to hear the sounds of screaming on foggy nights, or voices calling out in the wind. One man swore he saw women on the rocks below the cliffs, waving white cloths, their faces pale and blurred by mist, only for them to fade as he ran to help. But perhaps the most haunting element of all is the tale of lifeboat number 5. One of the lifeboats that was successfully launched from the Valencia was never found after the wreck. It vanished into the storm, presumed lost with all aboard. Then 27 years later, in 1933, a group of loggers working near Pachina Bay discovered something strange in a sea cave, an old lifeboat, remarkably intact, resting quietly on the rocks. It bore the name Valencia. Inside were human remains, skeletal, dressed in the faded tatters of early 21st century clothing. The boat had survived all that time, hidden away in a place no one thought to look. Why it took decades to be found, and why no one ever heard or saw it until then, remains a mystery. The coast near the site of the wreck became known as the Graveyard of the Pacific, a stretch of ocean that has claimed hundreds of ships over the years, but none left a ghostly mark quite like the Valencia. To this day, lighthouse keepers and hikers report strange echoes in the night, screams, whispers, the faint sound of bells. Some believe the souls of the Valencia's dead remain trapped in the place where they perished, endlessly replaying their final hours. There is even a theory, whispered among old sea hands, that the Valencia never fully sank, that somewhere beneath the waves or behind a veil of fog, she still sails, half submerged, a phantom vessel reliving her doom in endless twilight, a ghost ship without peace, calling out in the dark for help that will never come. What gives the Valencia story its enduring power is the sheer humanity of the tragedy. Children clinging to mothers, men sacrificing their spots in lifeboats, strangers holding each other to face the end, and then the quiet, the waves washing it all away. The ship became not just a symbol of maritime loss, but of the cruel indifference of nature, of how close survival can seem even when it's just beyond reach. The SS Valencia remains one of the most haunted shipwrecks in North American history, not because of legends alone, but because of how real it all was. Real faces, real cries, real hope, extinguished, and in that cold, unforgiving water off Vancouver Island, it's said you can still feel that echo. A shadow on the waves, a flicker of white, the silence of a ship that never truly left.
Part 27. The unanswered bell of the Lady Lovibond. The open sea is a place of stories, some forgotten, some retold, and some that cling to time like salt on old wood. Among them is the legend of the Lady Lovibond, a tale that begins not in horror but in love, yet it ends as many sea tales do, in death and darkness. What sets this story apart, however, is what happened after. What sailors claim to have seen, what lighthouse keepers reported hearing, a ship that sails not just in memory, but across centuries. A phantom schooner eternally trapped in its final voyage, doomed to repeat its fate every 50 years with haunting precision. In February of 1748, the Lady Lovibond prepared to set sail from London to Portugal. She was a sleek, three-masted schooner, finely built and newly launched, and her captain, Simon Peel, was a man not only proud of his ship but madly in love. Just days earlier, he had married a woman named Annetta, and against the customs of the time, he decided to bring her aboard for their honeymoon voyage. Sailors believed it was bad luck to have a woman aboard a ship, but Peel refused to listen. Love had blinded him to superstition, and so on February 13th, the Lady Lovibond left port, bound for the seas with joy in its sails. But love, it seems, had stirred envy in the heart of the ship's first mate, John Rivers. Unbeknownst to Peel, Rivers too had loved Annetta, quietly and from afar, and her marriage had shattered something inside him.
As the ship glided down the Thames and into open waters, rivers drank in silence, rage festering with every wave. By the time the Lady Lovibond reached the narrow and dangerous waters near the Goodwin Sands, a notorious stretch of shifting sandbanks off the coast of Kent, Rivers had made his decision. On the night of February 13th, under the glow of a full moon, Rivers crept to the helm while the rest of the crew celebrated below deck. The ship was calm, the air unnaturally still, with no one watching. Rivers seized the wheel and deliberately steered the Lady Lovibond directly into the sands. The impact was catastrophic. The hull cracked open, the masts splintered, the schooner, carrying its passengers, its crew, and the captain's beloved bride, was torn apart in the surf. No one survived. The tragedy shocked the maritime community, but the sea, as it often does, moved on. The wreckage was buried beneath sand and time, yet the Lady Lovibond did not vanish entirely. 50 years later, to the very day, on February 13, 1798, a vessel near the Goodwin Sands reported seeing a ship moving at full sail, heading straight for the shoals. Expecting disaster, the crew tried to signal, but the ship passed silently and then vanished before impact. No wreck was ever found. Then in 1848, again exactly 50 years later, multiple ships reported a nearly identical vision. A white schooner, sails full, moving fast, lights glowing warmly from within, music faintly audible on the wind, and then silence. No splash, no wreck, just empty sea. The pattern continued. In 1898, it was sighted again. In 1948, lighthouse keepers at South Foreland swore they saw a three-masted vessel cutting across the waves too close to shore, disappearing before their eyes. No record showed any ship due in the area. The coast was calm, the night was clear, and in 1998, modern sailors reported the same thing. Radar picked up a large, fast-moving object near the sands, but there was nothing there. No distress calls, no debris, only the strange sensation, as one ship captain described, of sailing in the shadow of something not quite real. What makes the Lady Lovibond legend so unsettling is its precision. Unlike other ghost ships that drift without purpose, she returns like clockwork, as if time itself is wound into her bones. Every 50 years, on the same day, near the same place, she reappears, reliving the night she was doomed by jealousy. The sea, in its vastness, seems to remember. Some believe the sightings are tricks of light and fog, that ships hallucinate or see mirages in the complex dance of air and wave over the shifting sands. Others point to the legend as a kind of maritime parable, a warning about envy, about defying tradition, or about the ocean's merciless balance between beauty and danger. But those who have seen the Lady Lovibond with their own eyes do not speak of allegory. They speak of music on the wind, a woman's laughter, a ship aglow with golden light, passing just out of reach. There are even whispered stories that the schooner is not merely haunting the sea, but searching forever, retracing her route, trying to find the path that might have led to joy instead of ruin. That within her phantom hull, Captain Peel and Annetta still walk together, unaware of the disaster repeating around them. That the bells heard from her mast on windless nights are not warnings, but echoes of a wedding song suspended in time. As we near the next scheduled appearance, 2048, speculation grows. Paranormal investigators, local historians, and curious sailors all wonder, will she come again? Will the Lady Lovibond emerge once more from the veil of sea mist, beautiful and doomed, her sails catching a wind only she can feel? Or has her final voyage at last found peace beneath the sands? Until then she waits, or we wait for her. Either way, the sea holds the secret, a shipwreck remembered not for the tragedy alone, but for the way it lingers, not broken on the ocean floor, but gliding endlessly across the tides of memory. And if you ever find yourself sailing near the Goodwin Sands on a moonlit February night, and you see a schooner with white sails and a golden glow, listen closely. The sea might be telling her story again. Part 28, The Whispering Wreck of the SV Palatine. The Atlantic coast of the United States holds many secrets, but few are as deeply woven into the wind and the water as the legend of the Palatine Light, a ghostly flame said to dance across the ocean near Block Island, Rhode Island, marking the resting place of a ship that met its end not just in storm or accident, but in silence, fire, and possibly betrayal. The story centers on the SV Palatine, a German passenger ship that vanished in the 18th century, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a trail of whispers that still echo through the fog. The SV Palatine, originally named the Princess Augusta, set sail from Rotterdam in 1738, carrying over 100 German immigrants, bound for a new life in colonial America. The voyage was long and fraught with hardship from the very beginning. Disease spread quickly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. By the time the ship reached the coast of the American colonies, it was said that nearly half of those on board had already perished. Hunger and cold gnawed at the survivors, and the crew, overwhelmed and increasingly desperate, reportedly turned to cruelty. In late December, the Palatine approached the shores near Block Island. Some accounts claim the crew, hoping to rid themselves of the sick and avoid legal entanglements, intentionally grounded the ship on the rocks. Others say a storm drove it toward the coast, battered and out of control. Whatever the cause, the ship foundered near Sandy Point, its hull breaking against the sharp coastal outcrops. Islanders gathered on the shore, some to help, others perhaps with darker intentions. What happened next is where the story fractures into legend. One version holds that the local residents, seeing an opportunity, lured the damaged vessel closer by lighting false beacons on shore. These lights mimicked safe harbors, but led the ship into the shallows where it could be plundered. According to this telling, once the Palatine was aground, the islanders boarded the wreck, stripped it of anything valuable, and left the remaining passengers, mostly sick, poor and helpless, to die as the ship caught fire and was consumed by flames. Another version, told by the islanders themselves, is more sympathetic. They say they took in the survivors, cared for them, and buried the dead with dignity. They claim the ship's fire was accidental or caused by the storm, and that the tales of cruelty were invented later by those far from the event, people who never walked the windswept shores or saw the horror firsthand. Still, the image of the burning ship persisted, and with it came something stranger, the light. Almost immediately after the wreck, fishermen and islanders began reporting sightings of an eerie glow out at sea. It came mostly in winter, around the anniversary of the wrecking, a flickering flame hovering over the water where the Palatine had gone down. It moved against the wind, sometimes growing brighter, sometimes fading to nothing, but never fully gone. Locals began calling it the Palatine Light, and stories grew. One tale speaks of a woman who had refused to leave the ship, searching for her lost child below deck. As the flames rose, she was seen screaming, her white dress lit by the fire as she ran through the smoke-filled corridors. Some say she was last glimpsed standing on the deck as the masts collapsed into the sea. Ever since, the ghostly flame has been said to carry her spirit, a restless beacon of grief and longing. Witnesses over the centuries have described the light in remarkably consistent ways. It appears as a wavering golden flame, sometimes accompanied by the faint sound of a woman's voice, sobbing or calling out. Boats that try to approach find nothing. No wreck, no debris, just cold water and wind. In the 19th century, author John Greenleaf Whittier immortalized the tale in a haunting poem called The Palatine, which described the burning ship returning again and again, doomed to replay its final agony before disappearing once more into the fog. What deepens the mystery is that no one has definitively located the remains of the Palatine. Some claim that it burned completely, with the charred bones of its timbers buried in the sand beneath Block Island's tides. Others suggest the wreck was salvaged and dispersed, its history scattered like ashes on the wind. But every few years someone sees the light. Skeptics argue that the Palatine Light is nothing more than a trick of the atmosphere, cold air meeting warm currents, creating a phenomenon called Fata Morgana, a mirage that bends light over the horizon. But those who have seen it speak with the weight of conviction. It wasn't a mirage, one fisherman claimed in the 1960s. It was a ship, and it was burning. His voice trembled, not from belief but from memory. There is something profoundly lonely about the Palatine story. Unlike other ghost ships which appear full-sailed and proud, the Palatine is always aflame. There is no redemption arc, no lingering crew seen at the helm, only destruction repeating itself, a moment frozen in pain. The ship does not wander or explore, it burns again and again over the same cursed stretch of sea. That image of a vessel locked in its final hour, glowing softly on the horizon, has etched itself into the soul of Block Island. Today the story is a part of local tradition. On some winter nights, you might find a few residents gathered quietly on the bluffs, looking out to sea. Some bring lanterns, some flowers, others only memories passed down from their grandparents. They wait in silence, not expecting, but open to the possibility that just maybe the sea will speak again. That a flicker of gold will appear in the night, not from a lighthouse, nor from the stars, but from a ghost ship reliving its end. And if it does, they will not call it an omen. They will not fear it, they will simply whisper to the waves, "She's come again," and let the tide take the story forward. The Palatine, after all, is not just a tale of horror, it is a story of echo, of the way trauma lingers in place, of how even the sea remembers. And when you walk alone along the dunes of Block Island and feel the wind shift, you may wonder if the light is watching, or if just beyond the mist, a woman in white still waits for her child, her cries riding the air between past and present, hope and fire.
Part 29. The Silent Watcher of the Beichimo. In the bitter cold of the Arctic Circle, where time seems to move slower and the sun forgets to rise for weeks at a time, an icebound mystery has drifted in and out of view for nearly a century. The SS Beichimo was not born haunted. She was forged for trade, an unremarkable steam-powered cargo ship built in 1914 in Sweden and christened for commerce. But over the years, something shifted. Her fate was not to rest quietly beneath the waves or be dismantled into steel and scrap. Instead, she became something else. A ghost. Not one of myth or superstition, but a very real phantom of the sea, seen again and again, drifting, unclaimed and unreachable, long after she should have vanished. The Beichimo was operated by the Hudson's Bay Company, tasked with carrying goods and furs between the remote settlements of Alaska and Canada. For years she made her rounds successfully, braving the punishing chill and unpredictable weather of the Arctic. Her mission was simple: bring supplies to outposts and return with pelts, work that demanded not grandeur but grit. But in the autumn of 1931, that ordinary rhythm was broken. In October of that year, the Beichimo was caught in an early storm while navigating the Beaufort Sea. The ice came fast, boxing her in before she could escape. The captain and crew disembarked, establishing a camp nearby in hopes the freeze would be temporary. But the ice held tight. The ship became immobile, sealed in a jagged coffin of frozen sea. For days the crew waited, keeping watch on the helpless vessel just a few hundred yards away. Then, as if by decision of the elements themselves, the weather worsened. A blizzard struck with such force that visibility was completely lost. When the whiteout cleared, the Beichimo was gone. Panic swept the camp. Had she broken free and drifted out to sea? Had she been crushed beneath the ice and sunk in silence? A search was launched, scouring the area for signs of wreckage or debris. After several days, a report came in. The Beichimo had been spotted, still afloat, some miles away. She had escaped, yes, but she had not sunk, and she had not stayed still. The crew recovered her, briefly, but the incident had shaken them. The ice was returning, and fear grew that she would again become trapped. So the Hudson's Bay Company made a decision. The ship was no longer worth the risk. She was abandoned, cargo still inside, left to the Arctic, left to fate. Most abandoned ships do not last long, but the Beichimo was different. In the years that followed, sightings of the Beichimo continued. She would appear near the coast, seemingly intact but empty, then vanish into the fog. She was seen by Inuit hunters, who sometimes boarded her and found nothing but decay and silence. Explorers claimed to have found her frozen in place, only for her to be gone when they returned. In 1939, a group of trappers came aboard and were forced to camp out on the ship for 10 days due to a sudden storm. They described the vessel as eerily intact, yet hollow, windows still framed in ice, doors creaking with the groan of shifting metal. But there were no signs of life, no prints, no nesting animals, just the sound of wind scraping across rust. What puzzled everyone was her resilience. Despite being left to the elements, the Beichimo continued to survive. Her hull, though battered, remained above water. Her structure endured storm after storm, cold after cold, long past her expected lifespan. She seemed to want to endure, to wander. Over the decades, she became a legend among northern sailors, a warning and a wonder. Children along the coasts grew up hearing stories of the ghost ship that refused to sink. Her name became shorthand for mystery, for the unknowable nature of the sea.
By the 1950s, Arctic air patrols had begun charting her movements. In 1962, she was seen drifting again, aimless but unmistakable. By then she had been adrift for over 30 years. No ship had been allowed to linger so long without crew or port, without anchor or master. She was a contradiction in motion, forgotten, yet always remembered. There were even proposals to recover her, to haul her out of the ice and preserve her as a museum piece. But each time, the sea intervened. Conditions grew dangerous. She vanished again. Her last confirmed sighting was in 1969, near the Beaufort Sea once more. Over 50 years had passed since her abandonment. She was seen trapped in ice, eerily upright, her smokestack like a finger pointed at the sky. Since then, no verifiable sighting has occurred. Some believe she finally succumbed to the ocean, her hull breached, her story closed. Others think she remains, hidden in remote channels or beneath drifting flows, waiting for another storm to stir her awake. But perhaps what gives the Beichimo her true haunting power is not that she's a ghost ship in the traditional sense. There are no reports of screams from her hull or phantoms on her deck. There are no glowing lights or cursed passengers. Her haunting is quieter, colder. She is a vessel without destination, a symbol of how even the most solid, engineered things can slip beyond human control. Her mystery is not in her death, but in her refusal to die. To this day, the Canadian government has opened files on her, and she is officially listed as missing. But that word feels too small. The Beichimo is not simply missing. She is watching. She is proof that the sea keeps what it wants, and returns it when it pleases. In the endless white and blue of the Arctic, she is a whisper, a question with no answer, a shape on the horizon that's never quite there when you reach it. If you ever find yourself sailing those frozen waters, keep your eyes on the fog. Not for danger, but for something stranger, a silent ship drifting with no crew, no lights, and no purpose but to move. If you see her, you'll know. She doesn't need sails or signal. She carries only time, and the memory of being left behind. Part 30. The cursed wreck of the Sabrina. The year was 1917. War had blanketed Europe in darkness, and the seas were no safer than the skies. German U-boats prowled the waters, hunting merchant vessels like silent wolves. Among those vessels was the Sabrina, a modest schooner-rigged barge tasked with transporting coal from Falmouth, England, to the port of Saint-Brieuc in northern France. She was not a warship. She had no guns, no armor, and little protection. But her journey should have been simple, a coastal voyage across the English Channel, one she had made before without incident. Yet when she set out in late September, she vanished from sight, slipping into a silence that would last 2 days. Then suddenly she reappeared, beached, intact, and completely devoid of life. The Sabrina was found aground near Cherbourg, her hull seemingly undamaged. Her sails were still raised, flapping gently in the wind. The cargo of coal remained untouched in her hold. But the 5 crew members who had manned her were gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, no damage to the ship's structure. Her lifeboat was still secured. Her logbook gone, her galley half prepared for a meal. It was as if the crew had simply stepped off the deck mid-voyage and vanished into thin air. The French authorities who arrived to inspect her were baffled. A ship run aground is not uncommon during wartime, especially with the threat of torpedoes. But a ghost ship, one that sailed itself onto shore with no crew to guide her. The mystery grew deeper when investigators noted the helm had not been lashed or fixed. It was free, which meant the ship had somehow stayed on course unaided. The wind had to have carried her, but how she managed to avoid rocks, sandbanks, and deeper wreckage remained unexplained. Some proposed the most immediate theory, that the Sabrina had been intercepted by a German U-boat. Perhaps the crew had been taken prisoner, the ship left to drift. But there were issues with that explanation. U-boats at the time typically destroyed their targets after boarding, especially when carrying cargo useful to the war effort. And yet the Sabrina was untouched. No signs of fire, no flooding, not even a single shell hole or evidence of sabotage. It seemed unlikely that a U-boat crew would have gone to the trouble of boarding, abducting the men, and sparing the vessel altogether, unless they had vanished for a different reason. Speculation turned darker. Had the crew mutinied and escaped? If so, why leave the coal behind, or the lifeboat? Had they encountered something at sea, something that frightened them so deeply they leapt overboard? But then where were their bodies? The waters off the French coast were relatively calm during that time, and no bodies were recovered along the nearby beaches. The tide should have returned at least one. It didn't. The crew were gone, erased. With the war raging and far more pressing battles to fight, the investigation into the Sabrina's ghostly arrival faded into background noise. The ship was towed, her cargo salvaged. The war machine moved on, but among coastal sailors, her story endured. The idea that a vessel could arrive with its sails up and its belly full, but its men gone without trace, unsettled even the most hardened sea captains. It wasn't just eerie, it was unnatural. In the years that followed, paranormal theories bloomed. Some whispered that the Sabrina had crossed paths with something beyond comprehension. Perhaps a tear in the fabric of time, or a cursed fog that swallowed the living but left wood and iron untouched. Others believed she had become ensnared in a moment of liminality, that strange threshold between the living and the lost, where the sea does not take but rather suspends. A floating purgatory, a moving tomb without bodies. More than a century later, the mystery remains unresolved. Maritime scholars occasionally revisit the case, intrigued by its simplicity. There are no grand legends surrounding the Sabrina, no sea monsters, no violent squalls, just a quiet barge on a routine trip, and the silent vanishing of 5 men. The more one looks into it, the more haunting the silence becomes. Some believe that the mystery lies not in the Sabrina herself, but in the stretch of sea she sailed. The English Channel, so often thought of as a busy and benign waterway, has its own shadows. In the centuries before radar, it devoured countless vessels without witness. Fishermen tell of strange lights below the waterline, of mists that descend without warning, of waves that fall silent before they crash. It is not a place of myth in the way the Bermuda Triangle is, but perhaps that makes it more dangerous. Its unpredictability is quieter, its ghosts less flamboyant. And it is from this quiet that stories like the Sabrina's are born. One could imagine her journey now, viewed from above. A grey sky, a still sea, the Sabrina cutting through the channel's calm, sails full, the wind whispering through the rigging. 5 men aboard, going about their duties. Perhaps they laughed, shared stories. Perhaps one of the mystery incarnate. A place where laws bend, where stories unravel, and where the line between presence and disappearance is as thin as mist on the deck. She never sank, she never burned. But in some ways the Sabrina is one of the most chilling shipwrecks of all, not because of what was found, but because of what was left behind. A ship that kept sailing after her story had ended. A vessel abandoned not by time, but by explanation. And perhaps somewhere beneath the churning waters of the channel, her crew still drifts, not lost, but suspended, in a moment that refuses to end.
Part 31. The Phantom Lights of the SS, Orang Medan. The year was 1947. The war was over, but the oceans had not returned to peace. Merchant ships and military crafts still roamed the seas, and whispers of strange happenings continued to ripple across naval channels. Somewhere in the straits between Sumatra and Malaysia, a stretch of water thick with heat, salt and silence, a distress call pierced the static. It was faint, the words distorted by interference and distance, but the message chilled those who heard it. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. A long pause followed, then another message, this one more haunting than the first. I die. The vessel was identified as the SS Orang Medan, a Dutch freighter of modest size. Her route was not officially logged, and her manifest unknown. No Allied naval authority had a clear record of her journey, but she was real, and she was calling from the edge of silence. Responding to the distress signal, a nearby American merchant ship, the Silver Star, changed course and began searching the coordinates. Hours later, through the heavy afternoon mist, the Orang Medan emerged, silent, still, drifting like a corpse in the swell. The boarding party from the Silver Star approached with caution. The vessel looked intact, no signs of external damage, no smoke, no indication of fire or flooding. Yet something felt wrong. As they climbed aboard, the feeling deepened. The deck was littered with bodies. Crewmen lay with their mouths agape, eyes wide open in terror, faces contorted in silent screams. Their hands were frozen in defensive postures, as if fending off something unseen. Even the ship's dog, found near the engine room, was dead, its lips pulled back in a snarl, as though it had died in the throes of panic. There were no wounds, no blood, no visible injuries of any kind. The radio operator was still seated at his post, his fingers curled over the key, his eyes staring forward in lifeless dread. The captain, found in his cabin, wore a similar expression, his body rigid, lips parted mid-command. There was no sign of violence, but every corpse seemed to speak of a death not born from the physical world. Something had gripped their minds, their hearts, and extinguished them from within. As the Silver Star's crew explored deeper, the temperature began to rise. Despite being in the tropics, the heat on board the Orang Medan became unbearable. The engine room was said to be the worst, hot enough to drive back even the most seasoned seamen. The air shimmered, thick with an unplaceable chemical scent, and just as they began to consider towing the vessel to port for investigation, smoke began to curl from below deck. A fire broke out, sudden and inexplicable. The rescue crew was forced to retreat. Moments later, the Orang Medan exploded. The blast was immense. Flames erupted from the hold, sending debris high into the sky. The ship split open, metal groaning like a beast in pain. And within minutes, the Orang Medan was gone, swallowed by the very sea she had once haunted. In the aftermath, there were no bodies recovered, no remains to study, no cargo to examine. Every piece of evidence that might have explained what happened had been destroyed in the fire or lost to the depths. The story should have ended there, and yet, it didn't. It grew. Sailors passing through the Strait of Malacca began reporting strange lights in the water at night, flickering orbs that hovered just beneath the surface, pulsing in patterns that no natural creature could mimic. Some claimed they heard voices on the radio, fragmented sentences in Dutch, sometimes just a scream, fading as quickly as they came. Others swore they saw the outline of a ship drifting through heavy fog, a vessel with no name, its deck empty, its sails hanging loose like tattered veils. Over time, the legend of the Orang Medan became something else. Not a war story, not a ghost tale, but a warning. A reminder that the ocean holds secrets that logic cannot explain. Some believe the crew was exposed to a chemical weapon, perhaps improperly stored nerve gas. Others say the ship was smuggling dangerous cargo, like potassium cyanide or nitroglycerin, and the crew died from accidental exposure. But those theories don't explain the terror etched into the faces of the dead, or the sudden fiery end that seeped to the famous fort that guards Havana's harbor. Her route was simple: cruises between New York and Cuba, a floating palace, complete with dining halls, orchestras, marbled lounges, and endless promises of sunlit days and moonlit nights. But on her return voyage from Havana, everything unraveled, slowly, then all at once. On the evening of September 7th, a storm was brewing off the Jersey coast. The skies were growing thick with low clouds and electric tension, but inside the ship, passengers danced, laughed, drank, jazz spilled from the lounges. The scent of salt mixed with perfume. The Morro Castle, though surrounded by darkness, was alive. That changed when Captain Robert Wilmot collapsed and died in his cabin that night, reportedly of a heart attack. It was sudden, but the voyage continued under the command of Chief Officer William Worms. Nothing seemed unusual, until in the deep hours of the morning, a fire broke out in one of the storage lockers near the writing room. Within minutes, it became a blaze. The Morro Castle, lined with wood paneling and filled with flammable furniture, turned into a furnace. Flames raced through the corridors. The smoke was thick, black, choking. The lights flickered, then failed. Crew members, many of them poorly trained for emergencies, panicked or disappeared. Doors jammed. Alarms were late. Some lifeboats were deployed. Others hung uselessly as fire licked their ropes. Passengers were trapped in cabins, coughing through wet towels, hoping the flames would pass. Others climbed over the rails, leaping into the cold, dark Atlantic, some breaking bones as they hit the waves. The fire gutted the ship from within. Over 100 people died, burned, drowned, suffocated. The survivors were pulled ashore by the heroism of local fishermen and rescue boats, dragged from the sea like ghosts. By morning, the Morro Castle had drifted, blackened, hollow, still aflame. She finally ran aground on the beach at Asbury Park, just 500 feet from the boardwalk. Crowds gathered to see her. A funeral pyre on the sand. Cameras clicked, children stared. She had arrived too late, carrying only death. But the tragedy was only the beginning. What followed was something stranger, something harder to explain. After the wreck was secured,
The US Coast Guard began to investigate. The cause of the fire, unknown. Arson was suspected, but by whom and why? A storm had delayed communication. Firefighting systems had failed. Multiple safety protocols had been ignored or bypassed. The captain's death the night before now seemed less coincidental. Then there was George Rogers, the ship's radio operator. At first hailed as a hero for staying at his post and sending SOS signals until the lines burned away. But later, as investigations deepened, suspicions grew. Rogers had a strange past. He had worked on multiple ships where fires or equipment failures had occurred. He was known for erratic behavior and had once been institutionalized. Some reports even claimed he had openly discussed how easily a ship could be sabotaged. Though he was never formally charged for the Morro Castle disaster, he was eventually imprisoned years later for the murder of a colleague using electrical equipment, adding a macabre twist to his legacy. The charred hull of the Morro Castle remained on the beach for months, a dark shape against the horizon. At night, people swore they saw movement on board, shapes at the portholes, flickering lights though there was no power, the sound of footsteps on steel decks, whispers that carried with the sea wind. Some believed the dead had never left, that the screams so sudden and suffocating in life had left an echo, a psychic stain that lingered. Children dared each other to get close. Locals crossed themselves. Rescue divers who examined the wreck spoke of an overwhelming dread inside the halls, of cold pockets in rooms still dry, of strange sudden nausea when near the ship's center. Eventually the remains of the Morro Castle were towed out and scrapped, but her legend was not dismantled with her steel. Stories persisted that her keel had been cursed, that the fire was not the first supernatural event aboard, that her maiden voyage had experienced bizarre malfunctions, that some crew had whispered about hearing voices from the ventilation shafts even before the fire. An engine room worker once told a journalist that, a week before the disaster, he found the boiler room colder than the upper decks, impossible given the heat below. Another spoke of seeing the captain talking to someone who wasn't there, only hours before his death. The town of Asbury Park never forgot. Some buildings near the beach report power surges and unexplained cold drafts during storms. The sand where the Morro Castle once lay is said to shift unnaturally, eroding faster than anywhere else along the coast. Locals call it the burnt stretch. Some say the ship is still there, not in metal, but in presence. That when the wind is right and the sky carries the weight of an incoming storm, you can smell the burning varnish again. That the sea remembers. Today, few remember the name George Rogers or the hundreds of passengers who boarded for a final vacation. But the Morro Castle still floats in memory, her story retold in whispers, in dreams, in sleepless hours beside the sea. Not all shipwrecks lie beneath the ocean. Some rest in the mind, invisible but never gone. Part 33. The vanishing crew of the SS Beichimo. The story of the SS Beichimo begins not with a tragedy, but with endurance. She was a sturdy vessel, built in 1914 in Sweden, and initially christened as Ångermanland. Her mission was practical trade, carrying goods like fur and food between European ports, and later to the Arctic settlements along the coasts of Canada and Alaska. After World War I, she was acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company and renamed Beichimo. For years, she braved the frigid waters of the Northwest Passage, cutting through sheets of floating ice and weaving between snow-covered islands. But her most famous voyage, the one that would define her legend, began in 1931, a voyage that never truly ended. That October, the Beichimo was nearing the end of her routine trading season, sailing along the western Arctic coast of Canada, filled with valuable cargo, mostly furs from Inuit trappers. But as she pushed toward Vancouver, the early onset of winter trapped her in sea ice near Barrow, Alaska. The crew had faced this before. They anchored, prepared to wait it out, expecting the ice to release them within days or weeks. But this time, the freeze was severe. Day by day, the Beichimo became more entombed, until the ice formed a solid wall around her hull. Escape became impossible. The Hudson's Bay Company sent supplies to the crew via aircraft. As conditions worsened, the company made a decision: evacuate the majority of the crew and leave a small group behind to watch the ship and protect the cargo. But the situation soon took a stranger turn. On November 24th, a violent blizzard engulfed the area. When the winds died and the snow cleared, the Beichimo was gone. Assuming she had sunk beneath the ice, the remaining crew trudged back to the evacuation point, defeated. But a few days later, a native Inuit hunter arrived with incredible news. He had seen the Beichimo drifting, intact about 45 miles away. The crew followed him, and there she was, not destroyed, not looted, just silently floating along the edge of the ice pack, uncrewed, abandoned by her caretakers, but refusing to sink. From that point on, the Beichimo became something more than a ship. She became a ghost. Over the next 4 decades, she was sighted again and again across the Arctic, always drifting, always empty. Sailors, explorers and trappers reported seeing her through binoculars, silent against the grey-white backdrop, her rusted hull standing out like a scar. On occasion, brave souls boarded her. They found her mostly intact, though gradually battered by time. In some instances, they attempted to tow her to port, but each time, the weather turned or the ice returned, forcing them to retreat. In 1933, a group of Alaskan natives found her adrift and boarded to seek shelter during a storm. In 1939, a group of prospectors encountered her trapped in pack ice again, still upright, still eerily preserved. In the 1950s, American whalers claimed they saw her drifting near the Beaufort Sea. Even in the 1960s, pilots occasionally spotted a ghostly vessel hugging the ice edge, trailing fog like a veil, but no one ever managed to claim her. No one ever found bodies, and no one could explain how she had survived so long, through storms and winters that crushed newer, stronger ships like paper. Some believed she had become sentient, guided by something unseen. Others suggested her original abandonment had opened a kind of rift, turning her into a time-lost object, existing slightly out of sync with the world. Inuit legends began to fold her into their oral histories. A ship that refused death, a vessel cursed to roam the edge of the world, never able to return home, never allowed to sink. Attempts were made to track her movements using naval records and local testimony, but she evaded every effort. Each new sighting brought with it more questions. Was she moving of her own accord? Was the ice carrying her like a ghost hand, releasing her just long enough to be seen, then hiding her again? The last confirmed sighting came in 1969, nearly 40 years after her disappearance. She was frozen in the pack ice of the Beaufort Sea, once again just out of reach. After that, silence. The Beichimo vanished, truly this time. No wreckage, no remains. Some speculate she finally succumbed to the deep swallowed whole after decades of defiance. Others believe she still drifts, hidden by fog and ice, waiting. To this day, she remains a mystery to maritime historians, and a favorite ghost tale among Arctic sailors. Her story is told in low voices in cabins and Coast Guard stations, her name etched into the lore of a sea that is already a realm of extremes and absences. The haunting nature of her tale is not only in her persistence, but in the image she evokes: a lone ship, sails down, bow heavy with frost, drifting silently across a white horizon, seen only in glimpses, then lost. A reminder that even in the age of engines and compasses, the ocean still keeps secrets, still carries away pieces of us, and refuses to return them. The SS Beichimo is no longer just a shipwreck. She is a myth, a ghost of iron and rivets, a wandering question. Part 34, The Whispering Hold of the SS Valencia. It began in January of 1906, off the rugged coast of Vancouver Island, a region sailors had already come to fear, and for good reason. The stretch was known as the Graveyard of the Pacific, a name earned by the countless vessels that had met their end on those jagged shores. But none would leave behind a mystery quite as chilling as that of the SS Valencia. She was a steamship, modest and strong, built to ferry passengers and cargo between San Francisco and Seattle. On her final voyage, she carried 108 souls, men, women, children, many of them seeking a quiet journey northward to resume their lives. What they found instead was terror, chaos, and a ghost story that has never truly ended. The trouble began when the Valencia encountered severe weather while passing through the Juan de Fuca Strait. Visibility dropped. Waves crashed over her deck like the hands of some ancient sea god. Navigational instruments, already outdated, failed to provide clear direction. Blinded and thrown off course, the Valencia struck a reef near Pachina Point. Her hull was torn open like parchment. Water flooded in, and the passengers, most of whom had never seen the violent face of the sea, began to panic. The crew attempted to lower lifeboats, but the storm turned the effort into a nightmare. Rafts capsized as soon as they touched water. Some were torn from their hoists and shattered against the iron sides of the ship. Women clutched children. Men screamed orders no one could hear. All the while, the Valencia sank lower and lower into the boiling surf. For hours she clung to the reef, battered but upright, close enough to land that survivors could see the rocky shore, but too far to reach it through the raging waters. Over the next 2 days, rescuers attempted to reach her. Some tried lowering boats from passing ships. Others attempted overland journeys through the tangled rainforest, but high waves and cruel winds kept them at bay. From the cliffs above, witnesses could see passengers still alive, clinging to the rigging. One by one, they slipped, fell, or were swept away. By the time rescuers reached the site, the Valencia had disappeared beneath the waves. Only 37 people survived. Over 70 perished, many of them never recovered. That alone would have made her story a tragedy, but the Valencia did not rest quietly. In the weeks that followed, strange sightings began to emerge. Fishermen claimed they saw a shadowy ship drifting near the same reef, even on calm days when no vessel should have been there. The shape, they said, was unmistakable. The slanted smokestack, the broken masts. Others told of hearing voices on the wind while passing through the strait. Screams, sobbing, the echo of distant prayers. Some claimed to see a woman in white standing on the waves, her arms outstretched, eyes hollow, and then, most disturbingly, there was the lifeboat. 12 years after the sinking, in 1918, one of the Valencia's lifeboats was discovered floating in a sea cave on a nearby inlet. It was upright, intact, its paint still visible, its wood barely weathered, as though it had been placed there. As though it had never truly left. No barnacles, no decay, just a silent relic, perfectly preserved, as if waiting. Over the next decades, the legend grew. Sailors who passed near the reef would report sudden chills. Ships' instruments would fail, their compasses spinning madly. Locals began referring to the area not just as the graveyard of the Pacific, but as haunted. Some avoided it altogether, rerouting their trips to steer clear. Not out of superstition, they said, but out of respect for the dead who had not found peace. Stories circulated of a phantom Valencia, still caught in the final moment of her demise, reliving the chaos in some eternal loop. Some believed her wreck had never fully sunk, that parts of her were still embedded in the sea floor and surfaced only when the fog was thick enough, when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Others whispered that the passengers themselves had left behind more than bones, that the fear, the despair had imprinted itself on the waters, that to sail those waves was to step into memory, into echo. Perhaps the most unnerving tale came from a lighthouse keeper stationed nearby in the 1930s. He claimed that on certain nights, he could see figures through his telescope, people standing on invisible decks, holding lanterns that flickered blue. He kept these sightings to himself until his retirement, when he finally confided in a local paper. "They don't wave for help," he wrote. "They just stare." Today, few physical remnants of the Valencia remain. Her rusted boiler perhaps, a plaque on the cliffs warning of the lives lost, but her presence endures in the minds of those who know the coast. Some boaters still claim to hear cries on quiet nights, far from any land. Others say the fog thickens too quickly near her resting place, swallowing sound and sense alike. And every now and then another lifeboat is spotted, empty, drifting, as if still searching for shore. What gives the Valencia story its chilling power is not just the tragedy, but the detail. The visible desperation, the screams heard from shore, the ghostly reenactments reported by hardened mariners, the notion that trauma can echo across time, that a moment of horror can root itself into the very sea and rise again, unbidden. Some believe the Valencia remains because she was not allowed to die gently. Her passengers were seen, their final moments were witnessed, but not answered, and in that incomplete ending, something was left open. A wound, a whisper. It is said that the ocean forgets nothing, that the deepest currents remember all that sinks. If that is true, then the Valencia has become more than memory. She is a warning written in mist, a ghost that will not fade, a vessel not just wrecked but unresolved, and somewhere off the coast of Vancouver Island she waits.
Part 35. The silent screams of the Palatine Light, off the coast of Rhode Island. Nestled between the curling waves and the jagged spine of Block Island, a spectral glow has been seen drifting across the waters for over 2 centuries. A flickering flame in the dark, sometimes described as a phantom ship ablaze, other times as a pillar of light gliding silently above the surf. Locals call it the Palatine Light, and though some try to explain it as trickery of fog or the glint of distant beacons, too many have seen it move against the wind, hover over the waves, or vanish just before it touches the shore. But to understand the ghostly glow, one must understand the story that birthed it, one of desperation, cruelty, and death. In the bitter cold of December 1738, a ship named the Princess Augusta left the port of Rotterdam, carrying over 300 German immigrants fleeing war, famine, and persecution. They had sold everything they owned for a chance at freedom in the New World. The voyage, however, was cursed from the start. The captain, reportedly more interested in profit than safety, overloaded the vessel and took on too few provisions for the long Atlantic crossing. Disease spread rapidly in the cramped, unsanitary quarters. Dysentery, typhus, and starvation took hold. By the time the ship neared the shores of America, nearly half the passengers were dead. Those who remained were skeletal, feverish, delirious from thirst and hunger. The captain continued, unbothered. A fierce storm blew the ship off course, and on December 26, the Princess Augusta wrecked on the northern shore of Block Island. According to islanders, the survivors, many barely clinging to life, were brought ashore and housed in local homes. But what happened next is where fact becomes murky and legend takes hold. Some accounts say the Block Islanders cared for the sick, buried the dead with dignity, and helped the remaining passengers survive the winter. Others paint a darker picture, one of greed, exploitation, and brutality. One version claims that when the townsfolk saw the emaciated passengers and the decaying ship still heavy with salvaged goods, they turned opportunistic. The sick were left to die. The dead were robbed. Survivors were sold into indentured servitude. The ship itself, stripped of anything valuable, was set aflame and shoved back out to sea to hide the evidence. The flames lit the night sky, and some say that as the ship burned, a woman's scream echoed across the water, so piercing and full of grief that it etched itself into the very waves. That final act is what birthed the Palatine Light. For years after the wreck, and continuing into the modern era, fishermen, lighthouse keepers, and beachcombers have reported seeing the spectral glow of a ship drifting along the northern coast of Block Island. Some say it resembles the Augusta, sails tattered and aflame but never consumed. Others describe a silent light that floats just above the surface, trailing smoke that disappears into nothing. Most disturbingly, many who see it claim to hear faint screams, high, mournful, and distant, like a cry carried on the wind from somewhere very far away. In the early 1800s, poet and abolitionist John Greenleaf Whittier visited Block Island and heard the tale. Moved by the legend, he wrote The Palatine, a haunting poem that recounts the ship's final voyage and the ghostly light that followed. His work helped preserve the story in American folklore, blending fact and fiction into something timeless. But even Whittier, years later, admitted he couldn't shake the feeling that something real, something terrible, had happened that winter night. Skeptics have tried to rationalize the sightings. They suggest that the Palatine Light is nothing more than a phenomenon of marsh gas, ignited methane from decaying seaweed. Others propose its light from distant lighthouses, refracting through fog. But these explanations falter in the face of consistent reports over centuries, many describing movements, shapes, and sounds that no natural illusion could account for. One tale from the late 1800s tells of a fisherman who rowed toward the light, thinking it was a vessel in distress. As he approached, he saw the silhouette of a burning ship, figures visible on the deck. But as he got within shouting distance, the ship vanished, not into the mist, but into thin air. He returned to shore shaken, swearing he had seen a ghost. Others have made similar claims. Some say the light passes beneath their boats, as though the ghost ship sails not just on the water, but through it. To this day,
On winter nights near the anniversary of the wreck, locals still gather at the bluffs overlooking the sea. They scan the dark horizon, searching for the glow. Some go to remember the dead, others to chase a glimpse of the unknown, and almost every year, someone sees it, a faint wavering light drifting silently over the waves. Sometimes alone, sometimes paired with a whisper, a cry, a feeling of weight in the chest. Not fear exactly, something colder, sadder, like watching a wound that never healed. The Palatine light endures because the wound it represents was never closed. A ship full of desperate souls, neglected by the captain meant to protect them, betrayed by the very land they had risked everything to reach. Whether the legend of the islander's cruelty is true or not, something about the Princess Augusta's fate refuses to be forgotten. Her story, and that of her passengers, lives on in the water itself, a slow glowing drift of memory and mourning. To some, the light is a warning, to others, a lament, but all who have seen it agree on one thing: it is not just a story, it is a presence. A mark upon the sea that even time cannot wash away. Part 36. The eternal vigil of the Eliza battle. The Tombigbee River snakes through Alabama, like a winding ribbon, narrow and deceptively calm in places, with currents that conceal its moods beneath the surface. In the heart of the 19th century, it was one of the main arteries of the South, carrying goods, people, and stories along its twisting path. Among the many steamboats that navigated its waters, none was more elegant than the Eliza battle. A grand vessel, all white wood and gleaming brass, adorned with chandeliers, velvet lounges, and polished oak banisters. She was the pride of the river, a floating palace meant not just for travel, but for spectacle. But in the early hours of March 1st, 1858, that grandeur gave way to horror as the Eliza battle met a fiery end, and in doing so became one of America's most enduring riverine ghosts. The day before, the Eliza battle had departed from Columbus, Mississippi, heading downriver toward Mobile. A cold front had gripped the region, coating the riverbanks in frost and sending a chill through the decks. The passengers huddled inside the Grand Salon, playing cards by oil lamp, sipping coffee, and listening to the soft strains of a string quartet that often accompanied the more luxurious voyages. The boat was full, not just with travelers, but with cotton bales stacked high on the lower decks, dry and tightly packed, the lifeblood of the southern economy. By midnight, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The fog was thick, curling around the banks like smoke, and the captain slowed the pace to avoid grounding the vessel. Then, somewhere near Beckley's Landing, a cry erupted from below deck: flames. One of the cotton bales had caught fire, perhaps from a dropped lantern, perhaps from spontaneous combustion, as was feared in those days. In moments the blaze spread, the dry cotton ignited like kindling. The fire leapt upward through the decks, consuming the wooden structure with terrifying speed. Panic broke out. Passengers scrambled through the smoke, many barefoot and half asleep, their nightclothes whipping in the icy wind. The river was close, just over the railing, but to jump was to risk drowning or hypothermia. Some took the chance, throwing themselves into the black water, hoping to swim to the shore. Others tried to find lifeboats, but the fire moved too fast. It swallowed the cabins, then the dining rooms, then the pilot house, sending the paddle wheels spinning in a final, frenzied turn. The steamboat, now a floating inferno, drifted downriver, illuminating the woods, the banks, and the sky above in an unholy orange glow. Farmers in the distance saw what looked like a comet trailing fire through the night. Screams echoed across the water. The music had stopped, the chandeliers fell one by one. The Eliza battle, once so full of life and music, had become a funeral pyre. In the morning, the riverbank was littered with debris, charred planks, scorched clothing, singed luggage. Bodies floated in the shallows, their faces unrecognizable. Survivors told of leaping from the burning decks, clinging to floating bales, calling out for loved ones who never answered. Some had seen the fire start, and had only seconds to react. Others had been trapped in their cabins, lost in smoke. In all, more than 30 people died, though some believed the true number was higher. The river, after all, had a habit of hiding its dead. But the Eliza battle did not simply fade into history. In the years that followed, riverfolk began to speak of strange sightings along the Tombigbee. On foggy nights, especially near Beckley's Landing, they claimed to see a great steamboat, wreathed in flame but never consumed, drifting silently downstream. Her decks were full, not with passengers of flesh and blood, but with shadows that writhed and reached toward the banks. The flames never faded, but the ship did, vanishing as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the smell of smoke and a feeling of overwhelming sorrow. Some stories were detailed. A tugboat captain in the early 1900s swore he had passed the Eliza Battle's ghost and heard faint music coming from her deck, violin strings warped by heat, playing a tune he later recognized as one of the last performed that night. Another fisherman claimed he saw a woman in a charred dress walking the shoreline, staring out across the water with empty eyes. When he approached, she vanished, leaving only a scorched footprint in the sand. Locals began to refer to the ghost ship as the fireboat. Children were warned not to go near the water when the mist grew too thick. Some even claimed that seeing the Eliza Battle was an omen of death or disaster or betrayal. River preachers said the ship had become a vessel for unfinished souls, her voyage unending, because her passengers had died unprepared, wrenched from life by fire and fear. In what makes the legend of the Eliza Battle so enduring is the contrast. She had been beautiful, regal, a floating marvel of engineering and elegance, and her end was not just tragic, but humiliating, brought low by fire, her grandeur reduced to ashes. Her ghost, they say, retains that contradiction. She appears in splendor glowing and whole, only to be engulfed by flames once again, playing out her final hours in an endless loop, a candle snuffed out and reignited by memory. The Tombigbee River still flows, winding through modern towns and quiet woods. Its waters are placid, its banks overgrown, but on certain nights, when the moon is veiled and the wind moves against the current, those who know the story pause and listen. A sound might come, a bell clanging faintly in the distance, the smell of smoke where no fire burns, a flicker of light just beyond the bend. They say the Eliza Battle is still there, still burning, still trying to reach a shore she'll never touch. Her passengers still caught between past and present, between the warmth of music and the cold grip of flame. A warning, a reminder that even rivers remember. And sometimes, they speak.
Part 37. The whispers beneath the waves of the Baltic Eagle, in the shadow depths of the North Atlantic, where cold winds meet colder currents, lies the final resting place of a vessel that was never meant to be remembered. She was not a warship, nor a grand passenger liner. She bore no famous name, nor did she carry a celebrated crew. But the Baltic Eagle was real, once a silent courier of steel and shadow, and now, according to those who have dared to drift above her grave, something else entirely. A ship haunted not just by ghosts, but by sounds. Sounds that do not belong. Built in the late 1930s, the Baltic Eagle was a merchant freighter with German origins, though her purpose was always murky. Officially, she ferried raw materials between northern ports, iron ore from Norway, timber from Sweden, and the occasional armament piece passed off as agricultural equipment. But those who worked her decks whispered of long nights, spent anchored in forbidden coves, of sealed crates marked only with numbers, and of men who spoke little and vanished often. By 1941, the Baltic Eagle had gained an informal reputation among dockhands and harbor watchers. She was unlucky. Not cursed, not yet, but unlucky. Her last journey was supposed to be simple. She was to carry a mixed load from Trondheim to Danzig, making a single stop at an obscure coastal outpost on the Danish shore. Her captain, a taciturn man named Erik Volmer, had made the voyage dozens of times, but something was different this time. The manifest was incomplete, the crew was unfamiliar, and the weather turned dark quickly, too quickly. A squall, then a full storm, descended on the vessel just after she left her Danish stop. The radio logs from a nearby fishing fleet report only one distress message before all contact was lost. Cargo unstable, water in the hold, crew not responding, then silence. When the sea calmed, no wreckage was found, no oil slicks, no shattered crates. The Baltic Eagle had vanished entirely, her last known coordinates etched into the patrol logs of the Danish Coast Guard with an annotation circled in red. Unnatural pressure drop recorded. That note would become the first clue in a mystery that refuses to end. For decades, the Baltic Eagle was forgotten. Her name was left off memorials, her case buried in the noise of wartime losses. But in the 1970s,
Sonar scans of the area unearthed something strange. A long, thin object on the seafloor, almost perfectly intact. Its orientation was odd, tilted slightly, as if resting on something just beneath the sand. Attempts to investigate the wreck were repeatedly delayed by sudden technical failures. Submersibles lost contact. Divers reported headaches, nausea, and bizarre audio interference in their recordings. One diver, an experienced Norwegian explorer named Lars Nyborg, described hearing something through his headset while descending toward the wreck. Not static, not equipment failure. Voices, soft rhythmic voices, speaking in what he swore was Low German, and singing. The Baltic Eagle had become a forbidden dive, unofficially of course. There were no formal bans, only patterns. Research vessels were subtly redirected, exploration budgets quietly reassigned, and yet some returned. Amateurs, thrill seekers, and a few of them brought back more than they expected. One such account came from a Polish diving crew in 1991. They claimed to have found a small entry point in the side of the wreck, a breach in the hull where water still flowed in and out like breath. Inside, the ship was disturbingly well preserved. Cables hung like cobwebs. Papers floated in place, edges yellowed but intact. Most disturbingly, the lights once wired to rusted generators occasionally flickered on, not continuously, not logically, just enough to illuminate long corridors where nothing moved, but nothing felt still. The divers filmed what they could. The footage later leaked online in the early 2000s was grainy and uneven, but a few frames showed something hard to forget. A shadow moving across a bulkhead that should have had no light source behind it. A reflection in a brass porthole that did not match the diver holding the camera, and a door slightly ajar, shutting itself without current or human touch. But it's the sounds that haunt people the most. Audio files extracted from the dive gear picked up layered frequencies not accounted for in standard equipment. One expert in marine acoustics claimed the files contained a human voice buried beneath the sonar pings, repeating a single phrase over and over. A leaked Nokda. He still lies there. Who he is has never been confirmed. Some believe the Baltic Eagle was carrying not just weapons but something else. Someone else. A figure of interest perhaps, or a forbidden artifact. Others lean toward the supernatural, that the storm that swallowed the ship was not a storm at all but a curtain drawn over a different realm, a crossing point opened by circumstance and secrecy, that whatever happened on the ship did not kill her crew but changed them, or locked them in a state between roles, not dead, not alive, just listening. The most chilling testimony came in 2015 from a modern salvage team hired to survey the area once again, this time for deep-sea drilling logistics. Their lead engineer, a British woman named Marianne Locke, reported that during their sonar sweeps, an object the size of the Baltic Eagle surfaced on their screens repeatedly, only to disappear minutes later. The techs thought it a glitch, until it happened at 3 different coordinates. And each time, the readings showed pressure changes consistent with a vessel rising slightly from the seabed. But no one saw it surface. Nothing broke the waves. And yet the instruments registered motion, rising, turning, returning. Marianne quit the job weeks later, citing personal reasons. But in a podcast interview months after, she said something that has lingered ever since. "It wasn't the ship that scared me," she said. "It was the feeling that we were being watched, not from the wreck but from below it. As if the sea itself was listening and waiting." Today, the Baltic Eagle remains where she fell, unmapped on most official charts, not marked by buoys, not explored by any government-led expedition. But every few years, another sonar glitch, another whisper, another diver who resurfaces in tears, unable to explain what he saw or heard. What makes her terrifying is not just the loss but the preservation. She did not break apart. She was not consumed by rust and time. She lies there perfectly shaped, like a memory too vivid to fade, waiting perhaps for something to finish. A ritual left undone, a name left unspoken. And in the silence above her, where the waves roll black and the wind carries no scent, it is said that if you drift long enough and listen closely enough, you might hear it too. A soft chorus repeating that phrase, "He still lies there.
He still lies there.
He still lies there.
He still lies there."
He still lies there. Part 38. The disappearing lights of the SS Valencia. The wind howled like a living thing along the jagged cliffs of Vancouver Island, slamming into the dark Pacific like a beast trying to claw its way back from the abyss. This stretch of coast, known grimly as the graveyard of the Pacific, had claimed hundreds of vessels over the centuries, each swallowed by a mix of violent storms, hidden reefs, and the haunting silence that followed. But among them, one wreck stood apart. One name lingered in the air long after the screams faded.
Eve.
SS Valencia, a ship whose end was horrifying and whose aftermath was impossible.
She was a passenger steamship.
Built in 1882, assigned to routes between San Francisco and the Pacific Northwest. By 1906, she had become a regular on the coastal route, carrying passengers and cargo through rough but familiar waters. On January 20th of that year, she left San Francisco on what was to be a routine voyage north to Seattle. On board were over 100 souls, families, businessmen, unsuspecting that they had just boarded one of the most cursed journeys in maritime history.
2 days into the voyage, storm clouds gathered, thick and low. Torrential rain blurred the horizon. Fog pressed in, suffocating the coastline.
Navigational errors followed. The ship veered off course. By the time the crew realized how far north they'd drifted, it was too late. At approximately midnight on January 22nd, the SS Valencia struck a hidden reef just off the coast of Vancouver Island.
The impact tore through her hull.
Water flooded the lower decks with terrifying speed. Panic ignited. The ship began to sink, listing to one side, wedged against the reef and battered by massive waves. Lifeboats were lowered into the black water, many capsizing immediately in the chaos. Some passengers were swept overboard. Others clung to debris to each other to hope. The crew tried to maintain order, but the screams and the darkness overpowered everything.
Survivors described the scene as hellish. People begging for life jackets, children crying out for mothers already gone.
Lifeboats crushed against the rocks by waves taller than buildings. Some passengers and crew managed to climb into the rigging, high above the deck, where they clung for hours, cold, wet, and exposed to the punishing wind. Rescue ships, delayed by the storm, arrived days later. By then, the Valencia was a wreck, broken in half by the relentless surf. Over 130 people had died. Only 37 survived. But the horror didn't end there.
In the days and weeks after the wreck, strange reports began to emerge.
Local fishermen claimed to see lifeboats drifting near the site, unmanned but undamaged. Then came the sightings of figures on the cliffs. People in early 20th century clothing standing near the edge, looking down at the water as if watching something sink. But when approached, they vanished. Others spoke of screams echoing from the cliffs during foggy nights, screams of women, of children, voices that didn't match any living soul. And then there was the lifeboat.
12 years after the Valencia sank, in 1980,
a sealing vessel navigating the same waters spotted something adrift. It was a lifeboat, battered, weathered, but intact. Painted on the side, still legible, was SS Valencia, boat number 5. Inside it was skeletal remains, 5 of them, curled in positions of sleep or prayer. No signs of trauma, no waterlogged rot, as if they had only just died. But the strangest part, the boat had no barnacle growth, no algae, no decay of any kind that one would expect after 12 years adrift in open ocean.
It was as if time had touched everything, except that boat.
Reports intensified. Locals claimed to see the ghostly outline of the Valencia herself, glowing faintly just beneath the water during certain moonlit nights. Sailors whispered of spectral lights bobbing in the waves, moving in formations that looked eerily like lifeboats. Campers along the coast swore they heard the clang of a ship's bell coming from the cliffs, even though there was no ship to ring it. And always, always there were the voices, faint, desperate, calling out from just beyond the reach of the shore. The Coast Guard investigated, of course, but they found nothing. No lights, no wreckage, no answers. Still, the stories persisted. Lighthouse keeper, stationed not far from the site in the 1930s, kept a journal. In one entry, he described seeing a full-sized ship during a foggy dusk, black hull, steam rising silently from her stack. He signaled but received no response. As the fog parted, he saw the name clearly, Valencia. When he looked again, she was gone. The The next day he found footprints leading to the cliff's edge, bare feet. No one ever claimed them.
To this day, the wreck of the Valencia lies hidden, its exact resting place lost to time and tides.
But the memories remain. Coastal First Nations peoples whose ancestors watched the ship burn and scream from the cliffs above have their own stories. They speak of spirits trapped between worlds, of a ship that tried to return home but was denied, of echoes that refused to die. No one sails those waters lightly anymore. Mariners detour. Locals stay off the beach at night, and those who have passed nearby say that if you turn off your engine and let the current carry you, you might hear it.
The faint creak of timber, the sound of a bell in the fog, and voices, so many voices, rising from below.
The SS Valencia is no ordinary wreck. She is a wound in the sea, a reminder that not all disappearances are clean, and not all ghosts fade.
Some remain exactly where they were lost, waiting for someone to finally bring them home.